I remember that Friday afternoon in late September when I suggested the camping trip. The four of us were sitting in Kathy's basement, our usual weekend hangout spot. I was 23 then, working a dead-end job at the hardware store, desperate for something to break the monotony. "There's this place about an hour north," I said, spreading out a wrinkled map across the coffee table. "My uncle mentioned it years ago, said it was perfect for camping, secluded, quiet, off the regular trails." Kathy looked skeptical, twirling a strand of brown hair around her finger. She was always the cautious one of our group. "Is it even legal to camp there? Sounds like private property." "It's not marked," I insisted. "Just this patch of woods between the state park and some farmland. People go there all the time." That wasn't entirely true. I'd only heard vague stories about the area hunters occasionally mentioning strange sounds, or hikers who'd gotten disoriented despite following what seemed like straightforward paths. But I kept those details to myself. "I'm in," said Wes, our resident thrill-seeker. "Been too long since we did something interesting." He had that familiar gleam in his eye, the one that usually preceded questionable decisions. "Count me out," muttered Kathy. "Last time we followed your adventure ideas, I ended up with poison ivy for 2 weeks." "Come on," I pleaded. "One night. We'll bring extra supplies, good flashlights. It'll be fun." "I'll go if Kathy goes," offered Blake, always the peacemaker. He'd been friends with Kathy since grade school and rarely did anything without consulting her first. The room fell silent as we all looked at Kathy. She sighed, recognizing her defeat. "Fine. But if anything happens, anything at all, we're leaving immediately. No arguments." "Deal," I agreed, too quickly. We spent the next hour planning, making lists of supplies, checking weather forecasts. It was supposed to be clear skies, cool but not cold, perfect camping weather. What I didn't tell them was why I really wanted to go there. 3 weeks earlier, I'd been driving past that area and had pulled over, drawn by something I couldn't explain. Standing at the edge of those woods, I'd felt watched. Not threatened, exactly, but acknowledged, like the forest itself had noticed me. I'd walked a few yards in, heart hammering in my chest, before a series of rapid snapping sounds too deliberate to be branches falling naturally sent me scrambling back to my car. I needed to know what was out there, and somehow I felt safer bringing friends along. How naive we were, how unprepared for what awaited us in that silent stretch of wilderness. If I could go back to that moment in Kathy's basement, I would have ripped that map to shreds. The following Saturday, we piled into Wes's battered Subaru, the trunk stuffed with our gear. The excitement was palpable, a mixture of nervousness and anticipation that made even mundane conversations feel charged with significance. "Take the next right," I instructed, consulting my phone's GPS. The signal was already weakening as we ventured farther from the main highway. "You sure about this?" Blake asked, peering out the window at the increasingly rural landscape. Fields of corn stretched out on either side, creating natural walls that seemed to guard whatever lay beyond. "Positive," I lied. In truth, I was navigating partly from memory, partly from intuition. The roads had started to look different from what I remembered during my solitary drive weeks earlier. As we bounced along deteriorating asphalt, Wes attempted to lighten the mood with jokes about axe murderers and abandoned mental institutions. Nobody laughed, but we forced smiles, pretending it was all in good fun. An hour later, we reached the unmarked dirt path that I believed led to our destination. Wes pulled the car off the road, partially concealing it behind a cluster of overgrown bushes. The sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the landscape. "We should hurry," Kathy noted, checking her watch. "I don't want to set up camp in the dark." We shouldered our packs and began walking, first through the edge of a cornfield where the stalks stood unnaturally tall, brushing against our shoulders. The soil felt soft underfoot, yielding in a way that made each step slightly unsettling, as if the earth itself was too thin, covering something else. "This doesn't look like a trail," Blake observed as we pushed deeper into the field. The narrow path we followed seemed to disappear and reappear at random intervals. "It's not official," I admitted, "more like a game trail or something locals use." Eventually the cornfield gave way to proper forest, a wall of trees that seemed to materialize suddenly, their trunks packed tightly together like sentries. The temperature dropped noticeably as we crossed this threshold, sunlight filtering weakly through the dense canopy. "Jesus," Wes began, then caught himself. "God, it's like stepping into a refrigerator." I led our small procession, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. My boots kept catching on gnarled roots that seemed to emerge from the ground without warning. Behind me, Kathy's breathing grew increasingly labored, punctuated by the sound of her swatting at insects that buzzed persistently around her face. "You okay?" I called back without turning around. "Fine," she replied tersely. "How much farther?" "Not far," I said. Another lie. Truth was, I had no idea how far we needed to go. I was looking for a feeling more than a place, that same sense of being noticed that I'd experienced before. After an hour of hiking, the forest seemed to thin slightly, revealing a small clearing where the underbrush was less dense. Something about it felt right, secluded but defensible, open enough to set up our tents but enclosed enough to feel sheltered. "This is it," I announced, dropping my pack to the ground. The others followed suit, relief evident in their expressions. None of us noticed how quiet it had become, or how the wildlife, birds, insects, even the wind in the trees had fallen completely silent the moment we entered that clearing. Setting up camp provided a welcome distraction from the oppressive silence that had settled around us. Wes struggled with the tent poles, cursing under his breath whenever they refused to connect properly. Blake gathered stones for a fire pit, methodically arranging them in a circle. Kathy unpacked our food supplies, organizing them with her characteristic precision. I found myself drawn to the perimeter of the clearing, restlessly pacing its edges. Something felt off about this place, but I couldn't pinpoint what exactly was bothering me. The trees seemed normal enough, a mix of oak, maple, and pine typical for this region. The ground was covered in a thick carpet of dead leaves and pine needles. Nothing unusual. And yet, anyone else notice how quiet it is? Blake finally verbalized what we'd all been feeling. "I haven't heard a single bird since we got here." Kathy paused her unpacking. "Maybe we scared them away." "All of them?" Wes countered, momentarily abandoning his battle with the tent. "Not even squirrels or chipmunks. Nothing." I tried to rationalize it. "It's getting late in the season. Animals might be less active." Nobody seemed convinced, least of all me. By the time we finished setting up, the sun had nearly disappeared, plunging the forest into premature darkness. We huddled around our small fire, its warmth providing comfort against the rapidly cooling air. Our conversation felt forced, unnatural, as if we were all performing for an unseen audience. "Remember that time in high school when we broke into the old mill?" Wes was saying, trying desperately to recapture our usual camaraderie. Blake was so scared A sound interrupted him, a distinctive crack of a branch breaking, not close but not distant either. We all froze, eyes darting toward the source. "Probably just a deer," I offered, not believing it myself. We resumed talking, but with less enthusiasm. Every few minutes, another sound would emerge from the darkness. Another snap, a rustle of leaves, once even what sounded like a dragging noise, slow and deliberate. "It's circling us," Kathy whispered after the third or fourth occurrence. None of us contradicted her. I retrieved a flashlight from my pack and directed its beam toward the trees. The light seemed to penetrate only a few yards before being swallowed by the darkness. I saw nothing unusual, just trees and underbrush, but the feeling of being observed intensified. "I'm going to check it out," I announced, standing up. "Don't," Blake said with unexpected firmness. "Whatever it is, let it be." I sat back down, secretly relieved for the excuse to stay by the fire. As the night deepened, so did our unease. The sounds continued at irregular intervals, never close enough to identify but never far enough to ignore. We took turns keeping watch, though none of us explicitly acknowledged what we were watching for. During my shift, while the others dozed fitfully in the tent, I noticed something that sent tendrils of fear crawling up my neck. The sounds had stopped, completely stopped, but in their place was a subtle difference in the air pressure, as if something large had moved very close to our campsite. I strained my eyes, scanning the tree line, and for a split second, I thought I saw a figure, just a shadow really, slightly darker than the surrounding darkness, standing perfectly still between two distant trees. When I blinked, it was gone. I didn't wake the others. What could I say? That I'd seen a shadow? That the forest felt wrong? Instead, I fed more wood to the fire and waited for morning with growing dread. Around 2 a.m., Wes emerged from the tent to relieve me of my watch duty. His eyes were puffy from interrupted sleep, and he moved with the cautious alertness of someone entering hostile territory. "Anything?" he asked, settling beside me near the dwindling fire. I hesitated. "Not really. Some noises earlier, but it's been quiet for the last hour." "Too quiet," he muttered, poking at the embers with a stick. "This place gives me the creeps." I nodded, reluctant to return to the confines of the tent, but equally uncomfortable staying out in the open. "Wake me if anything happens." "Define anything," Wes replied with a forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. Inside the tent, Blake and Kathy were sleeping fitfully. Blake had positioned himself protectively near the entrance, while Kathy had burrowed deep into her sleeping bag, only the top of her head visible. I squeezed into the remaining space, trying to find a comfortable position on the hard ground. My mind refused to quiet. Every slight movement of the tent fabric, every subtle shift in the ambient sounds of the forest, registered as a potential threat. Exhaustion eventually pulled me into a shallow sleep filled with fragmented dreams. I woke abruptly to the sound of Blake's voice, urgent and tight with fear. "Guys, wake up, now." The tent was bathed in the gray light of early dawn. Blake was sitting upright, perfectly still, listening intently. "What is it?" Kathy whispered, emerging from her cocoon. "Someone's out there, walking around the tent." Now that we were all alert, we could hear it clearly, soft footsteps circling our campsite, methodical and unhurried. They paused occasionally before continuing their orbit, each pause lasting just long enough to suggest observation. "Wes?" I called out, suddenly remembering our friend who should have been keeping watch. No response. "Wes," Blake hissed, louder this time. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound had been expectant, calculating. "I'm going out," I declared, reaching for the tent zipper. Kathy grabbed my arm. "Are you insane? We don't know who's out there." "Exactly why I need to check." Wes could be. I couldn't finish the sentence. The tension was broken by Wes's voice, coming from somewhere across the clearing. "Guys, you up?" Relief flooded through me. "We're in the tent," I called back. "Where are you?" "By the trees. Found something weird. Come look." Something in his tone made my skin crawl. It was Wes's voice, unmistakably so, but there was a flatness to it, an absence of his usual inflections. "Tell us what you found," Blake countered, apparently sharing my unease. A pause. "You have to see it." The three of us exchanged glances. Kathy shook her head almost imperceptibly. "We're coming out," I announced, making a decision. "Just give us a minute." I grabbed my pocket knife, a laughably inadequate weapon, but it was all I had, and unzipped the tent slowly. Morning light filtered through the trees, creating a hazy, diffused glow that somehow made the forest look more alien than it had in darkness. We emerged cautiously, scanning the clearing for Wes. The campfire had burned out completely, leaving only cold ash. Our supplies remained untouched where we'd left them. "Wes?" I called again. No answer. "He said he was by the trees," Blake pointed out, unhelpfully. Trees surrounded us in every direction. We stood back to back, turning slowly in a circle, searching for any sign of our friend. The forest remained stubbornly empty and silent. Then we heard it again, Wes's voice, now from a different direction entirely. "Over here, hurry." Without discussion, we moved toward our supplies, grabbing essential items and stuffing them into our day packs. Whatever was happening, we needed to be mobile. "Wes, if that's you, come to the camp right now," I shouted, trying to sound authoritative despite my racing heart. Rustling from the underbrush, movement between distant trees. Nothing definitive. "We need to find him," Blake insisted. "We can't just leave." "We're not leaving," I assured him. "But something's not right. We stick together no matter what." Kathy nodded grimly, tightening the straps on her pack. "If that's really Wes, he'll come to us." As if in response, we heard what sounded like laughter, distant and muffled, but recognizable as Wes's distinctive chuckle. It was coming from deeper in the woods, away from the path we'd used to reach the clearing. "That's not him," Kathy whispered. "It can't be." But even as she spoke, doubt clouded her eyes. What if it was Wes? What if he was injured or disoriented? Could we really abandon our friend based on nothing more than a feeling? The laughter came again, closer this time, beckoning. "We go together," I decided, carefully. At the first sign of trouble, we run back to the car, back to civilization. With trembling hands, I picked up a sturdy branch that could serve as a makeshift weapon. Blake and Kathy did the same. Side by side, we advanced toward the source of the sound, leaving the relative safety of our clearing behind. The forest grew denser as we moved away from our camping spot, the trees pressing closer together as if conspiring to slow our progress. Visibility extended only 20 or 30 feet in any direction before the woods dissolved into a confusion of shadows and overlapping trunks. "Wes," Blake called out periodically. His voice sounded muffled, absorbed by the thick vegetation instead of carrying through the air as it should have. I checked my phone, no signal, as expected, but the time read 6:17 a.m. The early morning light should have been strengthening, yet the forest floor remained in twilight, as if the canopy overhead had thickened specifically to block out the Sunday. "This doesn't make sense," Kathy muttered, voicing what we were all thinking. We couldn't have gone that far from the clearing. She was right. We'd been walking for no more than 15 minutes, maintaining what I thought was a straight line toward the source of Wes's voice. But when I turned to look behind us, I could no longer see any sign of our campsite. "I think we should go back," Blake suggested, anxiety evident in his voice. Before I could agree, we heard it again, Wes's laughter, now seeming to come from somewhere to our right. "Guys, you're going the wrong way." His voice was clearer now, almost normal. Against my better judgment, I changed course, heading toward the sound. Kathy and Blake followed reluctantly. "If this is some kind of prank," Kathy left the threat unfinished. The ground began to slope downward, gradually at first, then more steeply. The soil became softer, almost spongy underfoot, and the air took on a damp, earthy smell. We were descending into a ravine I hadn't noticed on our hike in. "Wes wouldn't come this way," Blake said. "It doesn't make any sense." He was right. The terrain was becoming increasingly difficult to navigate, fallen trees blocking our path, thick undergrowth grabbing at our ankles, the ground itself seeming to shift and give way beneath our weight. And yet, Wes's voice continued to draw us forward, each call slightly clearer, slightly more recognizable than the last. "I found something. You won't believe this." It was the excitement in his tone that kept us going. Whatever he'd discovered, it sounded important enough to justify his strange behavior. The ravine bottomed out in what appeared to be a dry creek bed, strewn with smooth stones and fallen branches. The air was noticeably cooler here, and unnaturally still. No breeze stirred the leaves overhead, no insects hummed among the rocks. "Wes?" I called again, my voice echoing slightly against the ravine walls. Silence answered me. "I don't like this," Kathy said, gripping her makeshift weapon tighter. "We need to go back." Even as she spoke, a noise emanated from further down the creek bed, a deliberate shifting of stones, as if someone were carefully picking their way across the rocky terrain. "There!" Blake pointed toward a bend in the ravine where the creek bed disappeared from view. For a split second, I caught a glimpse of movement, a figure rounding the corner, just far enough away that details were impossible to discern. It could have been Wes. It could have been anyone. "Wes, stop!" I shouted, frustration overcoming fear. "This isn't funny anymore." The figure paused, half hidden by a large boulder. Then, slowly, a hand appeared from behind the rock, waving us forward in a come-hither gesture. "That's not Wes," Kathy stated definitively. "I'm not going any further." Blake nodded in agreement. "We need to get back to camp, grab our stuff, and get out of here." I hesitated, torn between the need to find our friend and the growing certainty that we were being deliberately led astray. The figure behind the boulder remained motionless, waiting for our decision. "Wes," I called one final time, "if that's you, come out where we can see you." The hand disappeared. Seconds later, Wes's voice, now noticeably different, with a hollow quality that raised the hair on my arms, floated around the bend. "Come see." That was enough. Without discussion, the three of us began backing away, then turned and scrambled up the slope we had descended. The climb was more difficult than I expected. The soil crumbling beneath our feet, roots and rocks seeming to appear in our path that hadn't been there during our descent. Behind us, sounds of pursuit light, quick footsteps on stone, then the rustle of vegetation as whatever had been impersonating Wes began to climb after us. "Faster," I urged, helping Kathy over a particularly steep section. We crested the ravine, breathless and trembling, and plunged back into the forest, no longer concerned with direction, focused only on putting distance between ourselves and the thing below. After several minutes of frantic running, we paused to catch our breath and get our bearings. "Did we lose it?" Blake gasped, bent double with his hands on his knees. I strained to listen past the sound of our own labored breathing. The forest had returned to its unnatural silence. "I think so," I whispered, "but we need to find our way back to camp." Kathy fumbled in her pocket and produced a small compass. I think the clearing was northeast of the ravine. We oriented ourselves and began walking, more carefully now, alert for any sign of pursuit. The woods seemed to have changed somehow, the trees more twisted, the undergrowth more tangled. Nothing looked familiar. "This is impossible," Blake muttered after 20 minutes of increasingly disoriented wandering. "We can't have gone that far from camp." An unsettling thought occurred to me. What if the camp wasn't there anymore? What if nothing in these woods stayed in the same place? I pushed the idea away. There had to be a rational explanation. We were tired, frightened, and disoriented. That was all. "Let's try calling for Wes again," I suggested. "The real Wes." Blake nodded. "Wes," he shouted. "Where are you, man?" We waited, listening intently. Nothing. Then Kathy gasped, pointing toward a break in the trees ahead. "Look." Sunlight streamed through the gap, bright enough to suggest a clearing. Relief surged through me. "The camp," I exclaimed, hurrying forward. But as we emerged from the trees, it wasn't our campsite that greeted us. Instead, we found ourselves at the edge of a vast cornfield stalks, standing tall and unnaturally still in the morning light. "This is wrong," Blake said, stating the obvious. "We didn't come through a cornfield this big." "Actually," I said slowly, recognizing something about the landscape, "I think we did. This is the way back to the car." Kathy's eyes widened. "But what about Wes? What about our gear?" I scanned the edge of the forest, searching for any sign of our friend or the thing that had been impersonating him. Nothing moved among the trees. "We need help," I decided. "We'll go back to the car, drive to town, and get the police or park rangers or whoever has jurisdiction here." Neither of them argued. The prospect of returning to civilization, of escaping these woods, was too tempting to resist. We entered the cornfield cautiously, the stalks brushing against our shoulders as we forged a path through them. The ground felt damp beneath our feet, each step producing a soft, squelching sound. Halfway through the field, Blake suddenly froze. "Did you hear that?" We listened. From somewhere behind us came the sound of corn stalks being parted, as if someone or something was following our path through the field. "Run," I whispered. We abandoned caution, plowing through the remaining stalks with desperate energy. The rustling behind us accelerated, keeping pace. Just when it seemed our pursuer would overtake us, we burst from the edge of the field onto a narrow dirt road. Without pausing, we sprinted toward where we had parked the car the previous day. The vehicle sat exactly where we'd left it, looking impossibly normal and out of place after what we'd experienced. Wes's keys were still in my pocket. He'd given them to me for safekeeping when we set up camp. We piled into the car, locking the doors behind us. The cornfield stood placid and innocuous in the morning sun, showing no signs of disturbance despite our frantic passage through it. "What about Wes?" Blake asked as I turned the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered to life, and I felt a wave of relief so intense it made my hands shake on the steering wheel. "We'll get help," I promised. "Real help." As I pulled onto the main road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. For an instant, I thought I saw a figure standing at the edge of the field, a silhouette that might have been Wes, watching us drive away. Then we rounded a curve, and the cornfield disappeared from view. The local sheriff's office was a small brick building with an American flag hanging limply from a pole out front. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of coffee and floor polish. A dispatcher looked up from her computer as we burst through the door. "We need help," I blurted out. "Our friend is missing in the woods off County Road 17. The dispatcher, her nameplate read Torres, regarded us calmly. "When did this happen?" "This morning," Kathy explained, more coherently than I could manage. "We were camping. He disappeared while keeping watch." Torres picked up a phone. "I'll get Sheriff Dawson." While we waited, I became acutely aware of our appearance, disheveled, dirty, wild-eyed. We must have looked like lunatics or drug addicts. I tried to smooth down my hair and brushed some of the dirt from my clothes. Sheriff Dawson emerged from a back office moments later. He was older than I expected, maybe mid-60s, with a weathered face and alert eyes that sized us up immediately. "You folks lose someone in Harmon Woods?" he asked, gesturing for us to sit in the plastic chairs against the wall. "Is that what they're called?" Blake asked. "We just knew they were off County Road 17. The sheriff nodded. "That's Harmon Woods. Not really a camping area, though folks do it sometimes." He pulled out a notepad. "Tell me exactly what happened." We took turns explaining arriving yesterday afternoon, setting up camp, the strange sounds during the night, Wes's disappearance, the voice that led us deeper into the forest. As we spoke, Dawson's expression remained neutral, but I noticed his pen stopped moving about halfway through our account. "So let me get this straight," he said when we finished. "You heard what sounded like your friend's voice calling you, but you don't think it was actually him? Put that way, it sounded ridiculous." I nodded anyway. "And you left all your gear there? Tents, supplies, everything?" "We panicked," Kathy admitted. "We just wanted to get help." Dawson sighed, tucking his notepad away. "I'll send a deputy out with you to look for your friend and your gear. But I should tell you, folks get turned around in those woods all the time. The terrain's tricky, lots of ravines and hills that all look the same. Easy to lose your bearings." "But the voice," Blake insisted. "Something was mimicking Wes. Probably an echo," Dawson suggested. "Sound bounces around in those ravines. Or maybe it was your friend, disoriented from lack of sleep. You said he was on watch all night?" I wanted to argue but stopped myself. What was the alternative explanation? That something supernatural had lured us through the woods? That Wes had been taken by some malevolent forest entity? When can we go back? I asked instead. Deputy Miller can take you now. I'll put out a description of your friend to our patrols. He eyed us sympathetically. Try not to worry too much. People wander off in those woods fairly regularly. Usually turn up by nightfall, confused but fine. Deputy Miller was younger than the sheriff, maybe 30, with the built physique of a former athlete now going slightly soft around the middle. He drove us back to where we'd parked in his patrol SUV, asking questions about Wes's appearance and what he had been wearing. Sheriff's right about these woods, he commented as we turned onto the dirt road leading to our parking spot. They can play tricks on your mind, especially if you're tired or scared. We weren't hallucinating, Kathy said firmly. Miller raised his hands in a placating gesture. Never said you were, just that the mind fills in gaps sometimes, makes connections that aren't there. We reached the spot where Wes's car still Saturday. The morning had advanced to early afternoon, the sun now high overhead, baking the dirt road and surrounding fields in uncomfortable heat. All right, Miller said, checking his sidearm and flashlight. You folks point me toward your campsite, but stay close. These woods are easy to get lost in. We retraced our steps through the cornfield, which looked far less menacing in the full light of day. The stalks rustled gently in the occasional breeze, creating whispered conversations that no longer seemed threatening. At the forest's edge, I hesitated. Despite the daylight, despite the armed deputy beside us, something about those trees repelled me. The shadows beneath them seemed too deep, too absolute. It's this way, I forced myself to say, pointing along what I hoped was the path we'd taken the day before. Deputy Miller took the lead, moving confidently through the underbrush. We followed closely, our earlier fear tempered by his presence but not eliminated. The woods felt different in daylight, less actively malevolent, more indifferently dangerous. Birds called overhead, insects buzzed among the leaves, and occasionally small animals rustled in the underbrush, all the normal sounds that had been absent the night before. After 20 minutes of hiking, Miller stopped. You sure this is the right way? These trails branch a lot. I wasn't sure at all, but I nodded anyway. I think so. The clearing was large enough for 2 tents. We continued, the forest growing denser, the ground beginning to slope upward. Something about the terrain felt familiar, yet wrong somehow, like seeing a familiar room with all the furniture rearranged. This doesn't look right, Blake muttered beside me. We weren't going uphill yesterday. Before I could respond, Kathy grabbed my arm. Listen. We all fell silent. From somewhere ahead came a faint sound, a rhythmic tapping, like wood against wood. Could be your friend, Miller suggested, hand resting on his holster. Let's check it out. The tapping led us to another clearing, smaller than the one where we'd camped. In its center stood a weather-beaten wooden post, about 4 feet tall, with what looked like old fishing line attached to it. The line extended to several smaller sticks arranged in a rough circle around the post. The breeze caught the contraption, causing the sticks to swing and tap against the central post, the source of the sound we'd heard. What is that? Blake asked, voicing our collective confusion. Miller approached it cautiously. Some kind of homemade weather vane, maybe? Or a hunting blind? He examined it more closely. It's old, though. Been here a while. I scanned the clearing, searching for any sign of human presence, food wrappers, cigarette butts, footprints. Nothing. The ground was undisturbed except around the wooden construct. This isn't where we camped, I stated unnecessarily. Miller straightened up. Must have taken a wrong turn. Can any of you get your bearings from here? None of us could. The forest looked identical in every direction, same trees, same undergrowth, same filtered light, creating dancing patterns on the forest floor. Let's try going back to the cornfield and starting over, Miller suggested. Maybe approach from a different angle. As we turned to leave, the tapping accelerated. Despite no noticeable increase in the breeze, the sound grew louder, more insistent, as if trying to capture our attention. Miller frowned. That's odd. Let's go, Kathy urged, already backing toward the path we'd used to enter the clearing. We retraced our steps, moving more quickly now. The tapping faded behind us, replaced once again by the normal sounds of the forest. But as we walked, a new sound gradually became apparent. Voices, distant but distinct, engaged in what sounded like playful conversation. That could be campers, Miller suggested, changing direction to move toward the sound. Maybe friends of your missing buddy. The voices led us to yet another clearing, this one immediately recognizable. This is it, Blake exclaimed. This is where we camped. Our tents stood exactly as we'd left them, our supplies arranged around the cold fire pit. Nothing appeared to have been disturbed. "Wes," I called out, a surge of hope rising in my chest. "Are you here?" No response, but the voices we'd heard continued, now seemingly coming from just beyond the trees at the far side of the clearing. Miller drew his weapon. "Stay here," he instructed, moving cautiously toward the source of the sounds. We watched as he disappeared into the trees, his uniform quickly swallowed by shadows. The voices abruptly ceased. Minutes passed. The clearing felt exposed, vulnerable. I fought the urge to flee back to the road, to the car, to anywhere but here. "He's been gone too long," Kathy whispered. "Something's wrong," as if summoned by her words. Miller emerged from the trees, his expression troubled. "Find anything?" I asked, already knowing the answer from his face. He holstered his weapon slowly. "Nothing. No people. No signs of anyone passing through." He paused. "But I found this." From his pocket, he produced a wallet, worn brown leather, familiar in a way that made my stomach clench. "That's Wes's," Blake confirmed, reaching for it. Miller handed it over. It was just lying on the ground, about 50 yards in, like someone dropped it. Blake opened the wallet with trembling hands. Everything was intact: driver's license, credit cards, a few $20 bills. "Why would he leave his wallet?" Kathy asked, voicing the question we were all thinking. "And where did those voices go?" I added. "We all heard them." Miller frowned. "I didn't hear any voices when I was in there. Just regular forest sounds." A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature settled over me. I looked at Blake and Kathy, saw the same realization in their eyes. The deputy hadn't heard the voices because they weren't meant for him. "We need to pack up and go," I said firmly. "Now." Miller didn't argue. "Probably wise. I'll call this in, get a proper search party organized." We hurriedly dismantled the tents and gathered our supplies, working with desperate efficiency. No one ventured to the edge of the clearing alone, and we all pointedly ignored the occasional whispers that seemed to emanate from just beyond the tree line. As we finished packing, I noticed something odd about the fire pit, a small object nestled among the ashes that hadn't been there before. Carefully, I reached down and retrieved it, Wes's lighter, the custom Zippo with his initials engraved on the side. I showed it to the others without comment. We all understood its significance. Wes had been here, in our camp, while we were gone. The hike back to the road felt interminable. Every shadow concealed potential threats. Every natural sound masked potential pursuers. Miller led the way, his earlier confidence noticeably diminished. When we finally emerged from the forest, the late afternoon sun momentarily blinded us. The cornfield stretched before us, golden and swaying gently in the breeze. "I thought I heard something," Miller said suddenly, turning back toward the forest. Like someone calling. The three of us exchanged glances. None of us had heard anything. "It's just the wind," Kathy said quickly, tugging at his sleeve. "Let's go." Miller hesitated, staring into the trees with an intensity that made me nervous. Then he shook his head, as if clearing it. "Right, the wind." We hurried through the cornfield, our pace just short of running. Behind us, the forest stood silent and watchful, revealing nothing of its secrets. The search for Wes continued for 3 days. Teams of volunteers combed the woods, working outward from our campsite in an ever-expanding grid pattern. Dogs were brought in, their handlers confident they could track any human scent for miles. But the dogs refused to enter certain areas of the forest. They would whine and pull at their leashes, ears flattened against their heads, refusing to advance no matter how their handlers coaxed them. I stayed involved in the search efforts, partly out of guilt, partly out of a desperate need to understand what had happened. Blake and Kathy visited the command post daily but avoided returning to the woods themselves. On the 4th day, Sheriff Dawson called us to his office. "We're scaling back the search," he informed us, his expression grave. "We've covered every inch of those woods, multiple times. If your friend was there, we would have found him." "So what are you saying?" Blake demanded. "That he just vanished?" Dawson sighed. "People go missing in these parts. Not often, but it happens. Usually, there's an explanation. They get lost, fall into a ravine, sometimes even decide to disappear on purpose." "Wes wouldn't do that," Kathy insisted. "And if he'd fallen, your teams would have found him." "Unless he wasn't in the woods anymore," I said quietly, the thought that had been forming in my mind for days finally taking shape. What if he went somewhere else? Dawson gave me a strange look. "Like where?" I struggled to articulate what I was thinking without sounding completely unhinged. "I don't know. But there's something wrong with those woods. The way sounds travel there, the way you can get lost in a relatively small area, the voices we heard. Stress and exhaustion," Dawson suggested gently, "makes the mind play tricks. All 3 of us experienced the same tricks, Blake challenged. Mass hysteria is a documented phenomenon, Dawson replied. Look, I'm not dismissing what you folks went through, but I've been sheriff here for 22 years. These woods have a reputation, sure, but there's nothing supernatural about them. I wasn't convinced. Has anyone else gone missing there, besides Wes? Something flickered across Dawson's face, hesitation perhaps, or reluctance. There have been incidents, hikers who got turned around, hunters who came out with strange stories. And people who never came out at all? I pressed. Dawson leaned back in his chair, studying us for a long moment. Finally, he sighed. 3 cases in my time as sheriff, all ruled as probable accidents or voluntary disappearances. But yes, people who went in and were never found. The admission hung in the air between us, confirming our worst fears while explaining nothing. I want to see the case files, I said, surprising even myself with the demand. That's not possible, Dawson replied automatically. Those are confidential police records. Our friend is missing, Kathy interjected. If there's a pattern, something that could help find him. There is no pattern, Dawson interrupted firmly. Just unfortunate coincidences. But his eyes betrayed him, a flicker of uncertainty, a hint of something he wasn't telling us. What about before your time? Blake asked quietly. Any local legends about the woods? Stories passed down? Dawson stood up, signaling the end of our conversation. I'm sorry about your friend. Truly. We'll keep looking, but you folks should prepare yourselves for the possibility that we may never know exactly what happened to him. As we left the sheriff's office, a new determination settled over me. If Dawson wouldn't share what he knew, I would find someone who would. The town library was our next stop, a small building with an impressively comprehensive local history section. The elderly librarian, Mrs. Walsh, was initially hesitant to help when we explained what we were looking for. Harmon Woods has always been part of this town, she said, shelving books as she spoke. Nothing special about them. We're just trying to understand the area better, I explained, deliberately vague. Any historical information would be helpful. Something in my tone must have convinced her, because she led us to a back room filled with archived newspapers and local records. If you're looking for history, it's all here, she said, gesturing to the shelves, though I don't know what you expect to find. For hours, we sifted through dusty files and faded newspaper clippings. Most contained nothing of interest: town council meetings, harvest reports, birth and death announcements spanning decades. Then Blake found something, a newspaper article from 1967, yellowed with age but still legible. Listen to this, he said, smoothing the paper on the table. Local man claims discovery in Harmon Woods. It says a man named Edward Harmon must be related to the wood's namesake, claimed to have found evidence of previous habitation in the forest. He described stone foundations and unusual artifacts that predated European settlement. Any details about where exactly? I asked, leaning closer. Blake scanned the article. Not specifically, just that it was deep within the most remote section of the woods. Keep looking, Kathy urged. There might be follow-up articles. We renewed our search with increased focus, now looking specifically for mentions of Edward Harmon or unusual discoveries in the woods. An hour later, I found what we were looking for, a small article dated 2 weeks after the first. Harmon expedition returns empty-handed. The piece described how Edward Harmon had led a group of 5 men into the woods to document his discovery, only to return confused and disoriented after 3 days, claiming they could not relocate the site. The article had a dismissive tone, suggesting Harmon had either fabricated his initial claims or had been confused about what he saw. There's something else, Kathy said, holding up a brittle page from what appeared to be a local historical journal. This is from 1972. It mentions that Edward Harmon disappeared 5 years after his failed expedition. He left a note saying he was returning to find the truth and was never seen again. A chill ran through me. So he went back to the woods and never came out, Blake finished. We continued our research, finding scattered references to Harmon Woods throughout the decades, incidents of hunters reporting strange sounds, hikers becoming inexplicably disoriented, even a brief mention of a scientific study in the 1,980 seconds that was abandoned for unspecified reasons. But the most disturbing discovery came from a hand-bound collection of local folklore compiled by a high school history teacher in the 1,990 seconds. Among stories of haunted houses and Civil War ghosts was a section titled The Watchers of Harmon Woods. The account described how, according to local Native American tribes, the area now known as Harmon Woods had once been considered sacred ground, not a place of worship, but a boundary between worlds that should not be crossed. They believed the forest contained doorways, I read aloud, through which entities they called the Watchers could observe our world. These beings were said to be curious about humans, sometimes mimicking their voices or appearances to lure them deeper into the woods and closer to the doorways. Blake's face had gone pale. That sounds exactly like what happened with Wes's voice. I continued reading. Those who ventured too close to a doorway risked being pulled through to the other side, not dead, but no longer in our world. The tribes avoided the area entirely, considering it too dangerous, even for their most experienced hunters. Kathy shuddered. This is just a folktale, right? It can't be real. But we all knew it matched our experience too closely to dismiss entirely. There's more, I said, turning the page. When European settlers arrived, they ignored the warnings and built homes near the woods. Several disappearances occurred before they finally abandoned the area. The foundations of their homes supposedly remain somewhere in the forest, marking places where the boundary between worlds is thinnest. The stone foundations Harmon claimed to find, Blake muttered. I closed the book, my mind racing. We need to go back. Are you insane? Kathy hissed. After everything we just read? That's exactly why we need to go back, I insisted. If there's any chance Wes is still alive, still somewhere in those woods or beyond them, we have to try to find him. And how exactly do we do that? Blake demanded. Wander around until we find a magical doorway to another dimension? We find the foundations, I replied, surprising myself with my certainty. The article said Harmon couldn't relocate them when he went back with others. But what if they're only visible under certain conditions, or to certain people? This is crazy, Kathy muttered, but I could tell she was considering it. Maybe, I admitted, but what's our alternative? Except that Wes is gone forever and we'll never know why. Blake ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration familiar from years of friendship. If, and this is a massive if these stories have any truth to them, wouldn't we be risking the same fate as Wes? Not if we're prepared, I argued. We know what to look for now. We know not to follow voices or strange sounds. We stay together, no matter what. Kathy and Blake exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. When? Kathy asked finally. Tomorrow, I replied. Early morning, we go straight to our old campsite and work outward from there. As we left the library, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the town. I felt watched, although when I turned to look, there was nothing there, just empty sidewalks and closed storefronts. That night, in my motel room, I dreamed of Wes. He was standing in a clearing I didn't recognize, surrounded by trees that seemed wrong somehow, too tall, too straight, too still. He was calling my name, but when I tried to reach him, the distance between us remained constant no matter how fast I ran. When I awoke, gasping and disoriented, my room was filled with pre-dawn light. On the floor beside my bed lay Wes's lighter, the same one I'd found in the ashes of our campfire. I was certain I had left it in my jacket pocket, hanging in the motel room closet. We met at a diner on the edge of town, ordering breakfast none of us would eat. The waitress noticed our tense expressions and subdued conversation. You folks with the search party? She asked, refilling our coffee cups. For that missing camper? I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Terrible thing, she continued, oblivious to our discomfort. But those woods, people around here know better than to go too deep. What do you mean? Blake asked, suddenly alert. The waitress shrugged. Just stories. My grandma used to say those trees had eyes. Silly superstition. She moved on to another table, leaving us with our cooling food and troubling thoughts. We drove separately this time, a precaution in case something happened to one vehicle. The morning was overcast, a layer of thin clouds diffusing the sunlight into a gray haze that seemed appropriate for our mission. At the edge of the forest, we double-checked our supplies. Flashlights with extra batteries, compasses, though we all doubted their reliability in these woods, whistles, first aid kits, water, energy bars. I had also brought a digital recorder to document our experience, I told the others, though privately I hoped it might capture something we couldn't perceive with our ordinary senses. We stay together, I reminded them as we prepared to enter the trees. No matter what we hear or see, we don't separate. They nodded solemnly. We had agreed not to inform the sheriff of our plans. He would only try to stop us, and after days of fruitless searching, the official response had dwindled to occasional patrols that rarely ventured far from the established trails. The forest felt different this time, watchful but not immediately threatening. Birds called overhead, insects buzzed among the underbrush, small animals rustled through fallen leaves, normal woodland sounds that had been absent during our previous visit. We followed what we believed was the path to our old campsite, though the terrain seemed subtly altered, hills slightly steeper, ravines slightly deeper, distances slightly longer than I remembered. "Something's wrong," Kathy said after we had been walking for over an hour. "We should have reached the campsite by now." She was right. Even accounting for our circuitous route during the initial hike, we should have found the clearing where we'd set up camp. "Let's try a different approach," I suggested. "Instead of looking for the campsite, let's look for signs of the foundations mentioned in the articles." "And how do we do that?" Blake asked, frustration evident in his voice. "The woods cover miles of terrain." I hesitated, uncertain how to explain the intuition guiding me. I think we need to let the forest show us." "What does that even mean?" Kathy demanded. "It means we stop trying to impose our will on this place," I explained, struggling to articulate my thoughts. "Stop trying to force it to make sense according to our rules. If there's something here that defies normal explanation, we won't find it through normal methods." Blake looked skeptical, but Kathy nodded slowly. "Like how dowsers claim to find water. They don't search logically. They make themselves receptive to something they can't explain." "Exactly," I agreed, relieved someone understood. "So we walk, but with intention. We're looking for Wes, for answers, for anything that feels different." It sounded ridiculous when said aloud, but to my surprise, neither of them ridiculed the idea. Perhaps they, too, had sensed the strange logic governing these woods. We continued walking, but with a new awareness less focused on specific landmarks, more attuned to subtle shifts in the atmosphere around us. I found myself drawn in a particular direction, though I couldn't have explained why if asked. The terrain gradually changed, becoming rockier and more uneven. The trees grew older, their trunks broader, their canopies more expansive. Less undergrowth cluttered the forest floor, as if the massive trees had claimed all available resources for themselves. "It's cooler here," Blake observed, zipping up his jacket. "And quieter." He was right. The ambient sounds of the forest had diminished, replaced by an expectant silence that seemed to press against my eardrums. We crested a small rise and found ourselves looking down into a shallow depression about 50 yards across. At its center stood the remains of what might once have been a building, just a few courses of weathered stone forming a rough rectangle, partially covered by moss and fallen leaves. "The foundations," Kathy whispered, her voice barely audible. We approached cautiously, half expecting something to emerge from the trees and block our path. Nothing did, but the silence intensified, becoming almost physical in its presence. The stone remnants were clearly old centuries rather than decades. They formed the outline of what must have been a small cabin or outbuilding. Inside the rectangle, the ground was bare earth, devoid of the fallen leaves and plant growth that covered the surrounding area. "Look at this," Blake called, kneeling beside one section of the foundation. He brushed away accumulated debris, revealing symbols carved into one of the stones, crude but deliberate markings that resembled neither letters nor numbers, but something more primal. "They're all around the perimeter," Kathy noted, moving from stone to stone, like a boundary. I stepped inside the rectangle, half expecting some dramatic reaction, a flash of light, a sudden wind, a tearing of reality. Nothing happened, yet I felt a subtle difference, as if the air inside the boundary had a different quality, thinner somehow, less substantial. "Guys," I said, my voice sounding flat and lifeless in the strange acoustic of the space. "I think this is it. This is one of the doorways." Blake remained outside the rectangle, clearly reluctant to cross the boundary. "So what now? We just wait?" "We call for Wes," I decided, "but carefully. We're not trying to open anything or cross over, just making contact." Kathy joined me inside the rectangle, while Blake remained outside, ready to pull us back if necessary. "Wes?" I called, loudly but not shouting. "Can you hear us?" My voice fell dead in the still air, absorbed rather than echoing. "We're here to help you," Kathy added. "If you can give us a sign, anything at all." Silence answered us, profound and expectant. I activated the digital recorder, holding it out before me like a talisman. "Wes, if you can hear this recording, give us some indication. Make a sound, say something, anything to let us know you're there." Still nothing. I was beginning to feel foolish, standing in the ruins calling out to empty air, when Blake suddenly stiffened. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I hadn't heard anything, but the hair on my arms was standing on end, responding to something beyond conscious perception. "Play back the recording," Kathy suggested. I rewound the digital recorder and pressed play. Our voices came through clearly, followed by several seconds of silence. Then, just barely audible, a whisper. "Help me," We froze, looking at each other with wide eyes. Play it again, Blake urged, now stepping into the rectangle to hear better. I did. This time, we all heard it, Wes's voice, distant but recognizable, pleading for help. Where are you? I called out, recording again. How can we reach you? We waited, then played back the recording. Nothing but our own voices this time. Maybe it's not consistent, Kathy suggested. Or maybe we need to do something specific to strengthen the connection. Like what? Blake asked. Hold hands? Chant? Sacrifice a small animal? The attempt at humor fell flat in the oppressive atmosphere. The lighter, I said suddenly, remembering. Wes's lighter that I found in the ashes, then again in my motel room. I pulled it from my pocket, a simple silver Zippo with Wes's initials engraved on one side. It felt unusually heavy in my hand, and colder than the surrounding air would explain. I think it's a link, I continued, the idea forming as I spoke. Something that connects our world with wherever Wes is now. So, what do we do with it? Kathy asked. I hesitated, unsure. Everything we were doing was based on intuition and folklore, not any established procedure. There was no guidebook for communicating across dimensional boundaries. Let's try something, I said finally. I placed the lighter on the ground at the center of the rectangular foundation and stepped back. Wes, if you can hear us, use this to show us you're there. Move it, light it, anything. We watched the lighter, barely breathing. Seconds stretched into minutes with no response. Then, just as I was about to give up, a breeze stirred within the rectangle, a localized movement of air that didn't touch the surrounding forest. The lighter skidded slightly across the bare earth, rotating to point toward the northern edge of the foundation. Holy shit, Blake whispered. Did you see that? Before I could respond, the temperature around us plummeted. Our breath became visible in sudden clouds of vapor. The lighter moved again, more deliberately this time, spelling out a pattern in the dirt. Here. Wes? I called, my voice shaking. Are you here with us now? The lighter flipped over, then righted itself as clear a nod as was possible for an inanimate object. Are you alive? Kathy asked hesitantly. Another flip and right yes. Are you trapped? Blake added. Yes. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear my own thoughts. How do we get you out? How do we help you? The lighter began to move more rapidly, scratching letters into the dirt. Don't. It paused, then continued. Come. Another pause. Through. We exchanged glances, the implications sinking in. Wes was warning us against attempting to reach him. Is there another way? I asked. Can you come back the way you went in? No. Are you alone there? Kathy's question made me realize I hadn't considered that possibility that Wes might not be the only one trapped on the other side. The lighter hesitated, then spelled, Watchers. A chill that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature ran through me. The entities from the folklore, the ones who observed our world and sometimes lured people across the boundary. Are they hurting you? I managed to ask. No. Studying. The word appeared slowly, deliberately. Studying you. For what purpose? Blake asked. The lighter didn't move for several seconds. Then, curious, an absurd answer that somehow made perfect sense. If these entities were truly from another dimension or reality, human beings would be as strange to them as they were to us. Can they hear us now? Kathy whispered. The lighter moved again, always, watching. As if in response to this revelation, I felt a prickling sensation across my skin, an awareness of observation so intense it was almost physical. The forest around us had gone completely silent, not even the sound of wind in the leaves disturbed the unnatural stillness. We need to get you out, I insisted, addressing both the lighter and whatever unseen presence might be listening. Tell us how. Can't. Leave. Why not? Blake demanded. Are they keeping you prisoner? Not. Prisoner. Choice. The implication stunned me. You chose to stay. Willingly? Yes. Why, Wes? Kathy's voice broke. Why would you choose to stay there? The lighter moved again, more urgently now. Learning. Secrets. Truth. The words chilled me more than any threat could have. Wes had always been the most intellectually curious of our group, constantly questioning, constantly seeking deeper understanding. If these watchers had offered him knowledge beyond our world. When are you coming back? I asked, already suspecting the answer. Not. The air within the rectangle was now so cold it burned my lungs with each breath. The lighter's movements became more erratic, as if the connection was weakening. Wes, please, Kathy pleaded. Whatever they showed you, whatever they promised, it's not worth losing everything here. The lighter paused, then spelled one final message. Go. Now. Danger. We're not leaving without you, I insisted. But even as I spoke, the lighter flared to life on its own, the flame burning unnaturally tall and blue-white. In its light, I glimpsed something, a distortion in the air above the foundation, like heat waves rising from hot asphalt, but more structured, more intentional. And within that distortion, for just an instant, I saw faces, not human faces, not animal faces, but something that contained elements of both while being fundamentally neither. They observed us with an intensity that felt like physical pressure, their attention an almost tangible force. "We need to go," Blake said urgently, grabbing my arm. "Now." The rational part of my mind agreed, but something else, some impulse I couldn't name, made me reach for the lighter, intending to take it with us. As my fingers touched the metal, a shock ran through my body like an electrical current. The world tilted sideways, and for one terrifying moment, I saw both realities simultaneously, our forest and another place, overlaid like double-exposed film. That other place was similar to our world, but fundamentally wrong. The trees grew in geometric patterns no natural evolution would produce. The sky held colors that human eyes weren't designed to process, and moving among it all were the Watchers, their forms fluid and constantly shifting. In that instant of connection, I understood why Wes had chosen to stay. The knowledge available there was vast, revealing the universe as infinitely stranger and more complex than we had ever imagined. But I also understood the price of that knowledge. To learn those secrets was to become part of them, to be gradually transformed until returning became impossible. Blake and Kathy dragged me backward, breaking my contact with the lighter. Reality snapped back into focus, the glimpse of the other world vanishing like a dream upon waking. "Run!" Blake shouted, pulling me to my feet. We fled the clearing, not looking back even as the air behind us seemed to twist and distort, the boundary between worlds momentarily thinning. The forest around us came alive with sound, branches cracking, leaves rustling, voices calling our names in perfect mimicry of people we knew. We ignored them all, running blindly through the trees, focused only on putting distance between ourselves and the foundation. By some miracle, or perhaps guided by whatever vestiges of humanity remained in Wes, we found our way back to the edge of the woods more quickly than should have been possible. The cornfield stretched before us, normal and reassuring in the afternoon light. We staggered through it, gasping for breath, not stopping until we reached our cars parked by the side of the road. "What do we tell people?" Kathy asked as we leaned against the vehicles, our legs weak from exertion and fear. "Nothing," I replied. "Nothing they would believe anyway," and so we didn't. When Sheriff Dawson asked about our unauthorized return to the woods, we claimed we had been looking for personal items left behind during the official search. When Wes's parents called, desperate for updates, we told them only that we had found no new information. The official search was called off after 2 weeks. Wes was added to the small but significant list of people who had entered Harmon Woods and never emerged. Life in the town returned to normal, the disappearance becoming just another local tragedy, eventually to be reduced to a cautionary tale told around campfires. But the three of us knew the truth, or at least a fragment of it. Wes hadn't vanished. He had crossed over, chosen to remain in that other place with its impossible knowledge and incomprehensible entities. Sometimes, in the years that followed, I would wake from dreams of that other world, vivid, detailed visions that felt more like memories than products of my unconscious mind. In these dreams, Wes was always there, changed but still recognizable, trying to communicate something vital that I could never quite grasp upon waking. And occasionally, rarely, I would find Wes's lighter, the one we had left behind at the foundation, sitting on my nightstand or desk or kitchen counter. I never touched it again, never tried to use it as a conduit. Instead, I would carefully place it in a drawer or box, only to find it gone the next time I looked. A reminder, perhaps, that the boundary between worlds is thinner than we imagine, that realities overlap and intertwine in ways our minds aren't equipped to comprehend. Or maybe just Wes's way of letting us know that whatever he had become, some part of him remembered who he had been and the friends he had left behind. I never returned to Harmon Woods, but sometimes, when I drive past dense forest at twilight, I find myself scanning the tree line, looking for Watchers among the shadows, and wondering if they're looking back. It was late September 2023, a month after my 34th birthday, when I made that fateful decision to venture into the wilderness alone. My job at the accounting firm had become increasingly demanding, with 60-hour work weeks becoming the norm rather than the exception. The fluorescent lights of my office seemed to drain my energy, leaving me exhausted yet paradoxically restless. The monotony of spreadsheets and client meetings had created a pressure that built steadily behind my eyes. I needed an escape, something to break the cycle of wake, work, sleep. Nature had always provided that escape when I was younger, though I'd fallen out of the habit in recent years. You need to get outside more, my doctor had advised during my annual physical 3 weeks prior. Your blood pressure is higher than I'd like to see in someone your age. That Saturday morning, I woke before my alarm, the pale autumn sunlight filtering through my blinds. My apartment felt unusually confining, the walls too close, the air too still. I made a spontaneous decision while brewing my coffee I would go hiking, not just around the local park, but somewhere new, somewhere I could truly disconnect. I remembered a conversation with a coworker who had mentioned Black Pine Loop, a trail about an hour's drive from the city. It's not very popular, he'd said, but that's what makes it perfect if you want some real solitude. Solitude was exactly what I craved. I packed hastily, throwing a water bottle, a granola bar, and a light jacket into my backpack. I searched online briefly for a trail map but found only vague directions to the trailhead. That should have been my first warning, but in my eagerness to escape, I dismissed it. The drive was surprisingly pleasant. The highway gradually gave way to country roads, and then to a narrow, winding lane that cut through dense forest. The trees, mostly pine and oak, created a canopy overhead, dappling the road with shifting patterns of light and shadow. My phone lost reception about 15 minutes before I reached the small gravel parking area marked by a weathered wooden sign, Black Pine Loop Trail. I remember feeling a profound sense of relief as I stepped out of my car. The air was different here, crisp, laden with the scent of pine and wet earth. I locked my car, adjusted my backpack, and approached the trailhead. The path ahead disappeared into the trees, narrow but clear enough to follow. I paused to take a photo of the trail sign with my phone, thinking I might post it online later. Looking back, I wish I had shared my location with someone, anyone, before losing reception, but hindsight offers little comfort now. The beginning of the hike remains clear in my memory. The trail was slightly overgrown but navigable, winding through stands of tall pines and occasional clearings. Birds called in the canopy above. A squirrel darted across my path. Everything seemed so ordinary, so peaceful. I remember checking my watch about 45 minutes into the hike. It was just past 10:30 a.m. I had been maintaining a steady pace, and according to the trail information I'd found online, the entire loop should take about 3 to 4 hours to complete. That's the last clear memory I have until I found myself driving home, hands gripping the steering wheel too tightly, the setting sun casting long shadows across the road. Somehow, nearly 6 hours had vanished from my mind. The transition from memory to blackout wasn't gradual. There was no fuzzy edge, no sense of things slowly fading away. One moment I was walking along the trail, noting a peculiar formation of rocks to my right that resembled a crouching figure, and then nothing. The last sensory impression I recall with clarity was the sudden stillness. I had been listening to the forest sounds, the rustling leaves, distant birdsong, the soft crunch of my boots on the path when everything seemed to stop. Not in a dramatic, supernatural way, but in that subtle manner that makes the back of your neck tighten, the way silence falls in the woods sometimes when a predator passes nearby. I remember pausing, looking around, feeling a growing awareness that something wasn't right. The air felt heavier, somehow resistant against my skin. The colors of the forest seemed slightly off, as though viewed through a faintly tinted lens. I had taken a few more steps, my hand instinctively reaching for my phone to check the time. Then, blank space, a void where memories should be. My next conscious moment was behind the wheel of my car, driving down the highway toward home. The dashboard clock read 6:17 p.m. My hands were dirty, fingernails rimmed with soil. My hiking boots were caked with a dark reddish mud I didn't remember stepping in. Several small scratches marked the backs of my hands, and my right knee ached dully. The shock hit me gradually. I pulled over at a gas station, hands trembling as I tried to piece together what had happened. Had I fallen? Hit my head? But there was no pain, no bump or bruise to suggest a head injury. Had I simply lost track of time, zoned out while walking? But nearly 6 hours? That seemed impossible. I searched my pockets, looking for any clue. My phone was there, battery nearly dead. I checked my recent photos, hoping I'd taken pictures during the hike that might jog my memory. There was only the single photo of the trailhead sign, nothing more. My call history showed no outgoing or incoming calls, no texts sent or received. The only other evidence was a strange collection of small objects in my jacket pocket that I had no memory of collecting. 7 smooth black pebbles, unusually uniform in size and shape, and a small twig with 3 perfectly symmetrical forks. Why would I have gathered these things? I had no answer. As I continued driving home, an unsettling thought surfaced. What if I had encountered someone else on that trail? What if something had happened, something my mind was protecting me from? The highway lights blurred as anxiety tightened my chest. I found myself checking the rearview mirror repeatedly, though I couldn't have explained what I was looking for. By the time I reached my apartment, darkness had fallen completely. I locked the door behind me, then checked it twice. I emptied my pockets, laying out the mysterious pebbles and twig on my kitchen counter, staring at them as if they might speak, might offer some explanation. They remained silent, inert, yet somehow accusatory. That night, sleep proved elusive. I lay awake, replaying the fragments of memory I still possessed, trying to bridge the gap. Outside my window, the wind moved through the city streets, carrying sounds that seemed amplified in the darkness, a car door slamming, voices in conversation, the distant wail of sirens, ordinary sounds that now carried undertones of warning. When exhaustion finally pulled me under around 3 a.m., my dreams were filled with trees, endless rows of them, their trunks too straight, too uniform, like soldiers standing at attention. And throughout the dream, a persistent sensation of being followed, of eyes watching from just beyond my peripheral vision. Sunday morning arrived with harsh clarity, sunlight streaming through my bedroom window where I'd forgotten to close the blinds the night before. For a brief, merciful moment, the events of the previous day seemed distant, almost imaginary. Then reality reasserted itself as I noticed the mud-caked hiking boots by my door. The physical evidence was undeniable. Besides the dirty boots, my jeans from yesterday had grass stains on the knees. The scratches on my hands were shallow but numerous, like I'd pushed through dense underbrush. And there was a larger scrape on my forearm I hadn't noticed the night before, about 3 inches long, crusted with dried blood. I examined myself in the bathroom mirror, turning to check for any injuries I might have missed. My reflection looked back at me, pale and exhausted, but otherwise normal. No head injuries, no bruising that might explain the memory loss. Just the haunted look in my eyes, a look of someone who no longer trusted their own mind. The strange collection of pebbles still sat on my kitchen counter. In the morning light, they appeared less ominous, just ordinary stones, though their uniformity remained peculiar. The twig, however, seemed even more unnatural than I'd first thought. Its 3 forks were not just symmetrical but identical in length and angle, something I'd rarely seen in nature. I forced myself to eat breakfast, though the food tasted like nothing. My thoughts kept circling back to the missing hours, generating scenarios that grew increasingly disturbing. Had I wandered off the trail, encountered wildlife, met other hikers with harmful intentions? Around noon, I decided to check my camera roll again, scrolling through photos from the past few weeks. There was nothing unusual until I reached yesterday's date. After the trailhead photo, there were 5 more images I had no memory of taking. The first showed a section of the trail where it narrowed between 2 large boulders. The second captured a clearing with unusually tall grass. The third was blurry, showing what might have been a deer or other animal in the distance. The fourth showed my own shadow stretched across the ground, elongated strangely. The 5th and final photo made my stomach clench. It showed nothing but dense trees, but they were exactly like those described in the online forum post. I'd read unnaturally thin, their trunks twisted in spirals, their bark patchy and diseased-looking. The image was slightly tilted, as if taken hastily. I stared at this last photo for a long time, trying to reconcile it with my fragmented memories. I had no recollection of seeing these trees, much less photographing them, yet here was evidence that I had. That afternoon, I called in sick for Monday, knowing I wouldn't be able to focus on work. My head felt heavy, stuffed with cotton, my thoughts sluggish yet racing simultaneously. I found myself staring at my hiking boots for long periods, as if they might suddenly speak and tell me where they had walked. The scratches on my hands began to itch intensely around sunset. When I examined them again, they seemed to form a pattern, not random scratches from branches, but almost like marks deliberately placed. The thought sent a surge of adrenaline through me. Was I imagining things now, seeing patterns where none existed? That night, I dreamed of walking through the forest again, but in the dream, the trees were watching me, their bark splitting open to reveal eyes that tracked my movement. I woke at 2:17 a.m., drenched in sweat, certain I had heard something moving in my apartment. I lay frozen, listening intently, but the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and my own ragged breathing. I turned on every light and searched each room, looking behind furniture, in closets, under the bed. There was nothing, of course, nothing but the growing certainty that something had followed me home from that forest. Monday morning found me sitting in my doctor's waiting room, leg bouncing nervously as I checked my watch repeatedly. I had called as soon as the office opened, describing my symptoms as sudden memory loss and disorientation. The receptionist had hesitated before scheduling me for the earliest available appointment. Dr. Westfield had been my physician for nearly a decade. His office was a familiar space of muted colors and outdated magazines, usually a source of reassurance. Today, it felt confining, almost threatening. "So, tell me what's going on," he said after the nurse had taken my vitals and left us alone in the examination room. I explained about the hike, the missing hours, waking up, driving home with no memory of how I got there. I showed him the scratches on my hands and the larger scrape on my forearm. I mentioned the headache that had been building since yesterday, the difficulty concentrating, the strange dreams. He listened attentively, his expression neutral. When I finished, he began a series of tests, checking my pupils, testing my reflexes, asking me to follow his finger with my eyes, to touch my nose, then his finger, then my nose again. "Any history of seizures?" he asked. "Fainting spells? Episodes like this before?" I shook my head to each question. "Any drug use? Alcohol before or during the hike?" "No, nothing like that." He frowned slightly. "And you're certain about the timeline? You checked in at the trailhead around 9:30 a.m., and your next clear memory is driving home around 6 p.m.? "Yes," I confirmed. "Almost 6 hours just gone." He made notes in my chart, his pen scratching across the paper. "Physically, you seem fine. No signs of concussion or neurological issues that I can detect. Your blood pressure is elevated, but given the circumstances, that's not surprising." "So what happened to me?" I asked, hearing the edge of desperation in my voice. Dr. Westfield leaned back in his chair. "There are several possibilities. Transient global amnesia is one. It's a temporary disruption of memory formation, usually lasting several hours. It's rare, especially in someone your age, but not unheard of. Stress can be a trigger." "But I wasn't particularly stressed during the hike," I protested. "The opposite, actually. I went to relax." "The brain is complex," he said simply. "Another possibility is what we call a dissociative episode, a psychological response where a person disconnects from their thoughts, surroundings, even their identity. Often it's triggered by trauma or extreme stress, but sometimes it can happen with no obvious cause." I thought about this. "So I was, what? Walking around in some kind of trance for 6 hours? Possibly functioning quite normally," he corrected. "People in dissociative states can drive cars, have conversations, perform routine tasks. They just don't form memories of it." The thought was profoundly disturbing that I might have been moving through the world, interacting with it, while some essential part of me was absent. "I'd like to run some basic blood work, Doctor," Westfield continued, "to rule out any physical causes, and I'm going to refer you to a neurologist for further testing, including an MRI. I nodded, grateful for concrete action, though doubt gnawed at me. Would an MRI show 6 missing hours? Would blood work reveal what happened in that forest? "As I was preparing to leave, Doctor," Westfield paused, his hand on the door. "One more thing, I'd advise against returning to that trail, at least until we have more information. Whatever triggered this episode might still be present there." His warning was unnecessary. The thought of returning to Black Pine Loop filled me with visceral dread. Yet even as I assured him I would stay away, a part of me knew that the forest held the only real answers to my questions. That evening, I received a call from the neurologist's office. The earliest appointment was 3 weeks away. 3 weeks of not knowing, of questioning my own mind. The prospect was intolerable. I turned instead to the internet, searching more thoroughly for information about Black Pine Loop. Most results were, as I remembered, brief mentions on hiking forums, a few outdated trail maps. But then I found something new. A local news article from 2019 about a search and rescue operation in the area. A hiker had gone missing for 2 days before being found wandering along a road several miles from where he'd parked. The article was frustratingly vague about the circumstances, mentioning only that the man was disoriented and dehydrated when found. There was no follow-up article, no indication of what had happened to him during those missing days. I searched for more information about this incident but found nothing. It was as if the story had appeared briefly and then been deliberately forgotten, just like my missing hours. By Wednesday, The scratches on my hands had mostly healed, but the larger scrape on my forearm had developed an unusual redness around its edges. It didn't appear infected. There was no warmth, no swelling, but the skin surrounding it had taken on a slightly mottled appearance, like a subtle bruise that wouldn't fade. Sleep had become increasingly difficult. I would lie awake until exhaustion finally overcame anxiety, only to wake frequently throughout the night. My dreams, when they came, were fragmented but always set in the same forest. In these dreams, I was searching for something among the trees, though I never knew what. The sense of urgency was overwhelming, matched only by the dread of actually finding whatever it was I sought. That morning, as I showered, a flash of memory struck me with such sudden clarity that I gasped aloud. I was back on the trail, but it wasn't the section I remembered from the beginning of my hike. In this memory, the path narrowed significantly, barely visible among thick underbrush. The air felt dense, almost gelatinous, difficult to breathe, and there was a sound, a low, constant hum that seemed to emanate from the ground itself. The memory lasted only seconds before dissolving, leaving me standing in the shower, water running cold, my heart racing. Was it real? An actual fragment of my missing time? Or was my mind manufacturing false memories to fill the void? I called in sick to work again, unable to face the prospect of normal conversation, of pretending everything was fine. Instead, I spent the day researching memory loss, dissociative episodes, even the geological and environmental history of the area where Black Pine Loop was located. I learned that the region had been heavily logged in the early 1900s, then partially replanted in the 1950s. There were no significant environmental hazards, noted no abandoned mines that might leak gas, no toxic waste sites. The area was unremarkable geologically, with no unusual formations or cave systems that might explain my experience. By afternoon, my search had taken a darker turn. I found myself reading about cognitive effects of various toxins, parasites that could affect human behavior, even obscure psychological conditions that might explain my symptoms. None seemed to fit exactly. As evening approached, I received an unexpected call from an unknown number. When I answered, there was a long pause before a man's voice spoke. "Is this the person who posted about Black Pine Loop?" I hadn't posted anything online about my experience. "No," I replied cautiously, "but I did hike there recently." Another pause. "Did you see anything unusual?" My grip tightened on the phone. "Who is this?" "That doesn't matter," the voice said. "What matters is that you stay away from there. Don't go back." "Why?" I demanded. "What's out there?" "Nothing good," he replied. "Nothing you want to remember." Before I could ask anything else, the call ended. I tried calling back immediately, but the number was already disconnected. The call left me shaken, pacing my apartment, checking the locks repeatedly. Who was this person? How had they found me? And what did they know about Black Pine Loop that I didn't? That night, I dreamed of the twisted trees again. In the dream, I was standing among them, my hand reaching out to touch one of the spiraled trunks. As my fingers made contact with the bark, it yielded like flesh, warm and pulsing. I jerked awake, the sensation so vivid I could still feel the texture against my fingertips. I stumbled to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face. In the mirror, my reflection looked haggard, eyes sunken with exhaustion. As I lowered my hands from my face, something caught my attention, a small, dark mark on my right wrist that I hadn't noticed before. Under the harsh bathroom light, I examined it closely. It wasn't a bruise or scratch, but what appeared to be a small pattern pressed into my skin, like an ink stamp nearly faded away. The design was geometric, a circle containing what might have been a stylized tree or branch. I scrubbed at it with soap and water, but the mark remained. It wasn't ink. It seemed to be under the skin, like a tattoo beginning to heal. A tattoo I had no memory of getting. The room seemed to tilt around me as implications cascaded through my mind. If someone had marked my skin, what else might have been done to me during those missing hours? What else might I be carrying inside me, unknown, unseen? A week passed. The mark on my wrist neither faded nor became more pronounced. The neurologist's appointment remained weeks away. My work suffered as concentration became increasingly difficult. Colleagues noticed my distraction, my jumpiness, the dark circles under my eyes. I deflected their concerns with vague references to insomnia, to stress. The mysterious phone call was not repeated, but its warning echoed constantly in my thoughts. Stay away from there. Don't go back. I tried to follow this advice. I truly did. But as days passed with no answers, only more questions, the certainty grew that Black Pine Loop held the key to understanding what had happened to me. The decision to return was not made in a single moment but accumulated gradually, like sediment building into stone. By Friday evening, it was no longer a question of if, but when. I prepared more carefully this time. I charged my phone fully and brought a portable battery. I packed extra water, food, a first aid kit, a flashlight. I told a colleague I was going hiking and would check in with him by 5 p.m. A safety measure I should have taken the first time. Most importantly, I brought a small digital voice recorder. If my memory failed again, perhaps technology would succeed where my mind could not. Saturday morning dawned clear and cool. The drive to the trailhead seemed shorter this time, more direct, as if the road itself was eager for my return. The gravel parking area was empty when I arrived, just as it had been before. The same weathered sign marked the trail entrance, Black Pine Loop Trail. Standing at the trailhead, I activated the voice recorder. "It's 9:17 a.m., I spoke clearly. "I'm about to begin hiking Black Pine Loop for the second time. My purpose is to discover what happened during my previous visit." I paused, then added, "If you're listening to this and I'm not around, something went wrong." The first section of trail was exactly as I remembered, winding through tall pines, occasionally opening into small clearings. I narrated my progress into the recorder, describing landmarks, noting the time frequently. 9:45 a.m., approximately 1 mile in, nothing unusual so far. 10:12 a.m., past a distinctive fallen tree crossing the path, still following the main trail. As I hiked deeper into the forest, tension built within me. Each step brought me closer to the point where my memories had previously ended. Would it happen again? Would I suddenly wake up hours later with no recollection of what had transpired? Then I saw it, the peculiar rock formation I had noted just before my memories cut off last time. It resembled a crouching figure, though it was clearly just an unusual arrangement of natural stones. I stopped, heart pounding. 10:38 a.m., I spoke into the recorder. "I've reached the last point I clearly remember from my previous hike. Beyond this is unknown territory." I stood for several minutes, observing, listening. The forest seemed ordinary enough. Birds called overhead. A slight breeze moved through the canopy. Nothing suggested danger or abnormality. Taking a deep breath, I continued forward. The trail narrowed as it descended into a slight depression. The air felt cooler here, shadows deeper as the trees grew closer together. I kept the recorder running, describing everything I saw. After another 15 minutes of hiking, the trail split. The main path continued straight, while a narrower, less distinct trail branched to the right. I hesitated, trying to intuit which way I might have gone during my first visit. The narrower path drew my attention. It seemed familiar somehow, though I couldn't place why. I decided to follow it, carefully marking the junction with an arrangement of sticks so I could find my way back. This secondary trail quickly became more overgrown, requiring me to push through undergrowth occasionally. The scratches on my hands from my previous visit suddenly made more sense. 11:07 a.m., I recorded, following a side trail that branches from the main loop. Vegetation is denser here, no clear footprints or signs of recent passage. The forest changed subtly as I continued. The predominant pines gave way to other species I couldn't identify. The trees grew closer together, their trunks thinner, their arrangement somehow more regular than would occur naturally. A faint humming sound became noticeable, not mechanical, but like the collective buzzing of distant insects. The air felt heavier, more resistant, just as I had fleetingly remembered in the shower days earlier. 11:23 a.m. There's a sound here, a vibration almost. The air quality is different. The trees are unusual. I stopped abruptly as the trail opened into a small clearing. At its center stood a circle of those twisted trees I had seen in the 5th photograph on my phone, unnaturally thin, their trunks spiraling upward, bark patchy and diseased-looking. There were 13 of them, arranged in a perfect circle about 20 feet in diameter. The humming was louder here, emanating seemingly from the ground itself. The air within the circle appeared slightly distorted, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. 11:26 a.m. My voice shook slightly as I recorded. I found the trees from the photo. They're arranged in a circle. Something about them seems wrong, unnatural. I approached cautiously, staying outside the circle. The trees were even stranger up close. Their bark was not like normal tree bark. It was smoother, with an almost manufactured quality, the pattern too regular. The spiraling of the trunks was identical for each tree, as if they had been deliberately twisted by some immense force. At the base of one tree, I noticed a small pile of stones, black, smooth, uniform in size. identical to the ones I had found in my pocket after the first hike. "These are the same stones," I recorded. "Someone placed them here deliberately." As I circled the formation, staying well back from the trees themselves, I noticed marks in the soil indentations that might have been footprints, though they seemed too regular, too precise. Following them, I discovered a flat stone about the size of a dinner plate, partially hidden beneath fallen leaves. Kneeling, I brushed the leaves away to reveal a symbol carved into the stone surface, a circle containing a stylized tree or branch, the same symbol that had mysteriously appeared on my wrist. A wave of dizziness washed over me. The humming intensified, becoming less a sound and more a physical sensation that vibrated through my bones. The air within the circle of trees seemed to thicken, to pulse. "There's a symbol," I managed to record, my voice now barely more than a whisper. "It matches the mark on my wrist, I think. I think I've been here before." Memory surged back with crushing force, not in fragments or glimpses, but in a torrent that drove me to my knees. I remembered everything. I remembered walking this same path a week ago, feeling drawn to the twisted trees just as I had been today. I remembered the building hum, the thickening air, the strange quality of light within the circle. I remembered stepping into that circle, curiosity overcoming caution. The sensation had been immediate and overwhelming, like stepping into an electrical field. Every hair on my body standing on end, skin tingling painfully. The memories continued to flood back as I knelt outside the circle of trees, hands pressed against my temples as if to contain the pressure building inside my skull. I remembered seeing the stone with its carved symbol, kneeling to examine it just as I had done moments ago. But last time, I had touched it, traced the symbol with my fingertip. The stone had been warm, vibrating slightly in rhythm with the humming in the air. Upon touching it, the humming had intensified dramatically, becoming a roar that filled not just my ears but my entire consciousness. The trees had seemed to bend inward, their twisted forms elongating impossibly, reaching toward me. Then there had been others in the clearing, 3 figures wearing dark clothing, their faces obscured by what looked like beekeeping veils. They had appeared suddenly, as if stepping out from behind the twisted trees, though there had been nowhere for them to hide. "You shouldn't be here," one had said, voice muffled by the veil. I had tried to run, but my limbs had felt leaden, movements sluggish as if moving through syrup. The figures had surrounded me, their movements too fluid, too coordinated. "It's watching," another had said. "It's chosen." They had pressed me to the ground, pinning my arms and legs. One had produced a small device resembling a stamp or branding iron. I had struggled, but their strength had been surprising, their grips unyielding. The device had been pressed against my wrist, a quick, sharp pain followed by spreading warmth. "Marked," the figure had announced. "The connection is established." I remembered being pulled to my feet, marched through the forest along paths that didn't appear on any trail map. We had walked for what seemed like hours, the twisted trees appearing with increasing frequency as we progressed. Eventually, we had reached a larger clearing containing a structure, not a building exactly, but a sort of pavilion made of the same twisted trees, their upper branches woven together to form a canopy. Inside, more veiled figures moved about, tending to equipment I couldn't identify. I had been seated in a chair at the center of this pavilion, restraints secured around my wrists and ankles. A device like a crown or helmet had been lowered onto my head, cold metal pressing against my temples. "The preparation is complete," someone had announced. "Begin the extraction." Pain had exploded inside my skull, white-hot, unbearable. I recalled screaming until my voice gave out, my body convulsing against the restraints. Throughout it all, the veiled figures had watched impassively, occasionally adjusting dials on equipment arranged around the chair. "Sufficient," a voice had eventually declared. The pain had ceased abruptly, leaving me limp and disoriented. The restraints had been removed. I had been guided, half-carried back through the forest. My mind had been emptied, hollowed out. I remembered one of the figures speaking directly to me before releasing me near the main trail. "You will not remember this, but it will remember you, and when it calls, you will return." Then they had left me, and I had somehow found my way back to my car and driven home, the experience already fading from my conscious memory. Now, kneeling outside the circle of twisted trees, the full horror of what had happened, what had been done to me, crushed down like a physical weight. They had taken something from me, extracted something, and they had marked me for some purpose I couldn't begin to comprehend. I scrambled to my feet, backing away from the circle of trees, from the carved stone. The humming had intensified, becoming almost visible as a distortion in the air. The mark on my wrist burned, throbbing in time with the hum. I remember, I gasped into the recorder, which had captured every revelation. I remember everything. There are people here, in the forest. They did something to me. They put this mark on me. A sound from behind me, a twig snapping. I whirled around to see 3 figures at the edge of the clearing, wearing the same dark clothing, the same veiled hats. "You returned," one said, voice carrying clearly despite the distance and the intensifying hum. "As we knew you would." "Stay back," I shouted, fumbling in my pocket for my phone. "I've told someone where I am. They're expecting me to check in." "No one will miss you," another figure responded with terrible certainty. "No one ever does." I turned and ran, crashing through underbrush, abandoning the trail entirely. Behind me, I could hear them pursuing their movements, coordinated, efficient, gaining on me with every stride. The forest seemed to work against me, branches whipping at my face, roots rising to catch my feet. I fell repeatedly, each time struggling up to continue my desperate flight. My lungs burned, legs weakening as fear and exertion took their toll. I realized with growing despair that I was lost, with no idea which direction would lead me back to the main trail, to my car, to safety. A clearing appeared ahead. I sprinted toward it, hoping for a landmark, some indication of where I was. Instead, I found myself facing another circle of those twisted trees identical to the first, as if the forest had somehow looped back on itself. I turned to run in another direction, but my pursuers were there, blocking my escape. They approached slowly now, confidently, knowing I had nowhere left to go. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded, voice breaking. "What do you want from me?" "We are merely servants," the central figure replied. "It is not what we want. It is what it needs." "What? What needs me?" The figure gestured toward the circle of twisted trees. "The forest has been changing for decades, growing, evolving, becoming aware. It requires a sustenance of a specific kind. Memories, experiences, fragments of consciousness." "You're insane," I whispered. "Look at your arm," the figure commanded. "The mark is already spreading." I glanced down at my wrist. The symbol was indeed changing, fine lines extending outward from the circle, creeping up my forearm like roots or veins. "The connection has been established," the figure continued. "The first extraction was merely preparation. Today the forest will take all of you." They moved forward in perfect unison. I backed away, feeling the strange, thick air of the tree circle against my back. The humming had become a physical force, vibrating through my body, resonating with the spreading mark on my arm. "No," I pleaded. "Please, your resistance is noted," one said almost gently, "but unnecessary. Many have stood where you stand. All have contributed. All have served." My back pressed against one of the twisted trees. The bark felt warm, pulsing, alive in a way no tree should be. To my horror, I felt it yield slightly, adhering to my shirt, beginning to enfold me. In desperate panic, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my lighter, a habit I'd maintained despite quitting smoking years ago. With shaking hands, I flicked it to life and touched the flame to the bark of the tree, embracing me. The effect was instantaneous and terrifying. The tree recoiled, the bark splitting with a sound like a scream. The humming changed pitch, rising to a wail that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "No," one of the figures shouted. "The connection must not be broken." I didn't wait to see more. I ran, lighter still in hand, igniting anything that tried to block my path. The forest itself seemed to recoil from the flames, creating a corridor of retreat. Behind me, the veiled figures gave chase, but they moved more slowly now, their perfect coordination disrupted by the fire spreading through the underbrush. The wailing intensified, a sound of rage and pain that seemed to come from the earth itself. I ran without direction, without thought, driven purely by survival instinct. My only goal was distance to get as far from those twisted trees, those veiled figures, as possible. How long I ran, I couldn't say. Eventually, I broke through a line of trees and found myself on a road not the one where I had parked, but a county highway I recognized from my drive to the trail. I flagged down a passing car, an elderly couple who seemed alarmed by my appearance but willing to help. They drove me to the nearest gas station, where I called the police. I reported being attacked by strangers in the forest, omitting the more inexplicable elements of my experience. The officers who responded seemed skeptical, especially when I couldn't provide a clear location of the attack or a detailed description of my assailants. They drove me back to my car, which was still parked at the trailhead. As we approached, smoke was visible in the distance, apparently. My desperate use of the lighter had started a forest fire. The officers immediately called it in. then advised me to leave the area as emergency services would soon be closing the roads. I drove home in a state of numb shock, the reality of what had happened, what I had done settling over me like ash. That was 3 weeks ago. The forest fire was contained within a day, burning approximately 50 acres according to news reports. Officials attributed it to careless hikers, a description I cannot dispute. The mark on my wrist has stopped spreading but remains visible, a constant reminder that my experience was not hallucination or delusion. The neurologist found nothing unusual in my brain scans, no physical explanation for my episode of memory loss. When I described my symptoms more fully, he suggested I consult a psychiatrist. I've done so, but have been selective about what I share. Some truths are too outlandish to be believed, even by professionals trained to listen without judgment. I've researched obsessively since my escape. I've found scattered reports of similar incidents in forests across the country, hikers with missing time, unexplained markings, stories of veiled figures dismissed as hallucinations or inventions. Most are buried in obscure forums or local newspapers, quickly forgotten or rationalized away. The voice recorder captured everything, my returning memories, the confrontation with the veiled figures, my desperate escape. I've listened to the recording dozens of times, searching for any detail I might have missed, any explanation that might make sense of what happened. There is none. The only explanation is the one given to me in that clearing. Something ancient and terrible is growing in those woods, something that feeds on human consciousness, human experience, and it has servants who help it harvest what it needs. The mark on my wrist no longer spreads, but sometimes it throbs, usually when I'm dreaming. In these dreams, I'm back in the forest, standing among those twisted trees. But in the dreams, I'm not afraid. I'm waiting, watching. Part of me is still there, I think. The part they took during that first extraction. I've considered going to the authorities with my recording, my photographs, the mark on my wrist. But what would they do? Send officers into those woods, only to have them return with missing hours and marks of their own? Or perhaps they wouldn't return at all. Instead, I've started reaching out to people who've posted online about similar experiences, not just at Black Pine Loop, but in forests across the country. We share our stories, our evidence, our theories. We warn others to stay away from places where the trees grow too straight, or too twisted, where the air feels too thick, where silence falls too suddenly. Most importantly, we warn them about the circles, the perfect arrangements of trees that are not arrangements at all, but something else, something hungry. I don't know if the fire destroyed the twisted trees, the veiled figures, whatever intelligence was growing there. Part of me hopes it did. A larger part knows better. Fire might set back such an entity, but something capable of altering a forest, of manipulating human consciousness, would not be so easily destroyed. Whatever it is, it's patient. It thinks in decades, centuries, and it's spreading. As for me, I no longer hike. I avoid forests entirely. The outdoors that once offered escape now promises only terror. I've moved to a new apartment in the center of the city, surrounded by concrete and steel and human activity. I sleep with the lights on, but sometimes, standing at my window at night, looking at the distant tree line beyond the city limits, I feel a familiar humming not in my ears, but in my bones, in the mark on my wrist. And I know that someday it will call me back. Not today, not tomorrow, but eventually, because part of me is still there, feeding whatever grows among those twisted trees, and it never forgets what belongs to it. It was early September of 2013 when the idea first surfaced during one of our rare phone calls. A camping trip, just like old times. I hadn't seen Jason or Cole in nearly 18 months by then. Life had scattered us after college like leaves in autumn wind. I was buried under 60-hour work weeks at a marketing firm in Vermont. Jason had taken a job with a shipping company in New Hampshire. Cole bounced between construction sites and temporary apartments, never quite settling anywhere. "Remember Whispering Ridge?" Jason asked during our call, his voice crackling with poor reception. The name alone made my stomach tighten. I remembered it too well. We'd camped there once during our sophomore year of college. It wasn't an official campsite, just an unmarked clearing about 3 hours deep into the state forest. No designated trail led there. No rangers patrolled it. You had to climb over a steep natural ledge to reach it, hence our nickname for the place. We'd discovered it by accident during a hike 5 years earlier. The spot had everything: a flat clearing perfect for tents, a small stream nearby, and someone had already arranged rocks into a fire ring. Most importantly, it offered complete isolation. No cell service, no other hikers, nothing but wilderness stretching for miles. "What about it?" I asked, although I already knew where this conversation was heading. "We should go back," Cole interjected. "One last trip before winter hits." I hesitated. Something about that place had always felt wrong to me, even during our first visit when nothing unusual happened. But nostalgia is a powerful drug, and the thought of escaping my cubicle for a weekend tempted me beyond reason. "Just 3 days," Jason pressed. "Friday through Sunday, like the old days." Against my better judgment, I agreed. We settled on the 3rd weekend of September. I requested time off work. Jason arranged for coverage at his job. And Cole never needed permission from anyone. We coordinated supplies through a group text: sleeping bags, food, water purification tablets, first aid kit, headlamps, boots. I volunteered to bring the tent, a 4-person weatherproof model I'd purchased for a trip that never materialized. Jason would handle food, mostly dehydrated meals and energy bars. Cole promised firewood and alcohol. As the day approached, I found myself checking the weather obsessively. The forecast showed clear skies, but I packed extra tarps anyway. Something about returning to Whispering Ridge made me anxious in ways I couldn't articulate. I told myself it was just pre-trip jitters. The night before our departure, I dreamt of trees with eyes not eyes embedded in bark, but watching from between branches. I woke at 3:17 a.m., drenched in sweat, despite the autumn chill. My apartment felt too empty, too quiet. I lay awake until dawn, listening to the occasional car passing on the street below, wondering if I should cancel. I didn't. Some decisions we make knowing they're mistakes, yet we make them anyway. We met at a diner just outside the forest entrance, arriving in separate vehicles. Jason looked thinner than I remembered, his once athletic frame now wiry and tense. Cole hadn't changed much, still broad-shouldered and sporting that perpetual 5 o'clock shadow. We ate quickly, reviewing our route over coffee and maps. "The turnoff is unmarked," Jason explained, tracing a finger along a faded hiking trail. "We'll park at the main lot, then hike about 40 minutes to this creek. From there, we head east through this section of pines until we hit the ridge." Cole nodded, mouthful of pancakes. "And we're sure we can still find it?" "I've been back once," Jason admitted, surprising both of us. "About 2 years ago. It's still there." I wanted to ask why he'd gone back alone, but something in his expression stopped me. We drove to the trailhead in convoy, my car following Jason's old Honda, Cole riding shotgun with him. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a ranger's truck and a couple with hiking poles preparing for a day trip. We shouldered our packs, checked our supplies one last time, and headed into the forest. The main trail was well maintained for the first mile, but as we veered east onto the unmarked path, Jason remembered, the terrain grew challenging. Fallen trees blocked our way multiple times. The forest floor was spongy with decades of decomposing leaves. Overhead, branches formed a canopy so dense that by mid-afternoon, it seemed like dusk was already settling. "It's colder than I expected," Cole said, zipping his jacket higher. He was right. Despite the forecast promising mid-60 seconds, the temperature in the forest couldn't have been above 50. Our breath formed clouds in front of our faces. The air smelled sharp with pine and something else, something metallic, like the scent of pennies in your palm. "We should be close," Jason murmured, pausing to consult his compass. "The ridge should be just ahead." We pushed through a thick stand of pines, branches scraping our arms and faces, and suddenly there it was, the ledge, a natural stone formation that rose about 15 feet, creating a wall we'd need to climb to reach our destination. "Just like I remembered," Cole grinned, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. We climbed single file, finding the same handholds and footholds we'd used years before. At the top, we helped each other over the final lip of rock, then stood for a moment, catching our breath and looking down at the clearing below. Whispering Ridge hadn't changed. The fire pit remained, stones blackened from countless flames. The clearing was perhaps 30 feet in diameter, surrounded by dense forest on all sides except for the ledge we'd just climbed. The stream trickled nearby, barely audible over the constant hushing of wind through pines. "Home sweet home," Jason said, dropping his pack. We made camp efficiently, working with the practiced coordination of people who'd done this together before. The tent went up near the center of the clearing. We gathered additional stones to reinforce the fire ring. Cole arranged his pre-cut logs in a neat stack nearby. I unpacked the small camp stove and cooking gear. By the time darkness fell, we had a fire crackling, 3 camping chairs arranged around it, and our sleeping bags ready inside the tent. I heated water for our dehydrated meals while Jason produced a bottle of whiskey from his pack. "To old friends," he toasted, passing the bottle. The whiskey burned going down, but it pushed back against the unusual cold. We ate our reconstituted pasta, reminisced about college days, and avoided talking about our current lives. The fire cast long shadows that danced at the edges of the clearing. Occasionally, one of us would glance into the darkness beyond our campsite, then quickly return to the conversation. "Remember when we used to think we'd change the world?" Cole laughed, but there was something bitter in his voice. Jason nodded. "Still might. There's time." "Is there?" I asked, not sure why the question surfaced. The conversation lulled. The fire popped and hissed. Somewhere, deep in the forest, a branch snapped. "Did you guys hear that?" Cole asked. We all pretended we hadn't. I woke before dawn, disoriented. The interior of the tent was pitch black and freezing cold. My watch read 5:22 a.m. Beside me, Jason slept facing away, his breathing deep and regular. Cole's sleeping bag was empty. Needing to relieve myself, I unzipped the tent as quietly as possible and stepped outside. The fire had died completely. Not even embers remained. A thick mist hung just above the ground, transforming the clearing into something from another time. The air smelled wrong, not the expected forest scents of pine and earth, but something stagnant, like standing water in an abandoned basement. I found Cole sitting on a fallen log at the edge of the clearing, staring into the forest. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked, approaching slowly. He didn't turn. "Something's watching us." I followed his gaze but saw nothing except trees and mist. Probably just deer or something. "Not deer." His voice was flat. I heard it moving around the tent all night, circling, breathing. A shiver ran across my shoulders that had nothing to do with the cold. "You want some coffee? I can get the stove going." Cole finally looked at me, and I was struck by how exhausted he appeared, eyes sunken, skin ashen. "Did you notice the stream?" "What about it? It's running backward." I laughed nervously. "That's not possible." Cole stood up. "See for yourself." I followed him to the stream, more to humor him than anything else. The water looked darker than it should, almost black in the weak pre-dawn light. I crouched down, watching leaves and twigs drift by. Cole was wrong, the stream flowed in the normal direction, but as I watched, I noticed something odd about the water itself. It seemed to move too slowly, as if slightly more viscous than water should be. "It's just water," I said, standing up. Cole shook his head. "It changed when you came. It knows we're watching now." I was about to respond when Jason called from the tent. "What are you guys doing?" "Just getting some air," I called back, grateful for the interruption. "I'm going to start coffee." The day improved with sunlight and caffeine. Cole became more like himself, laughing at Jason's jokes and helping prepare breakfast. By mid-morning, the incident seemed forgotten. We decided to explore the surrounding area, partly for something to do and partly to gather more firewood. We hiked along the ridge, following the stream upstream. The forest grew denser, the trees older and taller. Nearly an hour into our walk, we noticed the first anomaly, a perfect circle of mushrooms surrounding a bare patch of earth. Not unusual in forests, but these mushrooms were a vibrant red, with white spots that none of us recognized. "Don't touch those," Jason warned. "They look poisonous." 20 minutes later, we found the structure. It appeared suddenly through a break in the trees, a crude shelter made of weathered plywood nailed to living trunks, with a tattered tarp stretched across for a roof. It might have been a hunter's blind at first glance, but the position made no sense for hunting. It faced a solid rock wall with no game trail nearby. "Someone lived here," Cole murmured, approaching cautiously. He was right. Inside the small space, we found remnants of human habitation, a rusted can opener, a metal cup crusted with something brown, a rotting backpack. "Check this out," Jason called from behind the shelter. We joined him to find what appeared to be an arrangement of animal bones not scattered randomly, but carefully placed in complex patterns. Small mammal skulls, raccoons, possums, maybe a fox formed the center of the design. Larger bones radiated outward in spiral patterns. "What the hell is this?" I whispered. "Someone's art project," Jason suggested, but didn't sound convinced. Cole crouched down, examining the pattern without touching it. "These aren't all animal bones." A heavy silence fell over us. Jason broke it first. "We should head back." None of us argued. The return journey took longer than it should have. Twice we found ourselves walking in circles despite following what should have been a straight path along the ridge. The third time we emerged at an unfamiliar clearing, Cole lost his temper. "This is impossible. The stream is right there. We just need to follow it downhill." "Let's try again," I suggested, trying to sound calmer than I felt. "We just need to stay together and pay better attention." It was nearly dusk by the time we found our campsite again. Jason immediately set about building a fire while I prepared our dinner. Cole sat on a log, staring into the forest, unusually quiet. That night, none of us suggested exploring any further. We kept the fire burning higher than necessary and finished Jason's whiskey. The conversation was stilted, full of long pauses and unfinished thoughts. When we finally retreated to the tent, it was with unspoken relief. "Tomorrow we head out early," Jason said as we settled into our sleeping bags. "First light." Cole and I murmured agreement. Despite the exhaustion of our day, sleep came reluctantly. I drifted off, listening to the forest sounds wind through branches, occasional animal calls, and something else that might have been footsteps circling our tent. Too rhythmic to be random, too deliberate to be wildlife. The scream woke me, a sound so primal and terrified that I was on my feet before my mind fully registered what I'd heard. The tent was empty except for me. My watch read 3:17 a.m., the same time I'd awakened in my apartment before the trip. "Jason? Cole?" I called, fumbling for my headlamp. Outside, the clearing was transformed. A dense fog had settled, so thick I could barely see 10 feet ahead. The fire had died completely. There was no sign of either of my friends, but their boots remained neatly placed outside the tent. "Jason!" I shouted, louder this time. "Cole!" Something moved in the fog, a shadow, quick and low to the ground. I spun toward it, heart hammering against my ribs. Nothing there. My headlamp cut weak paths through the mist as I circled the campsite, calling my friends' names with increasing desperation. No response came except the distant rustling of leaves. Both their sleeping bags were empty, but their phones and wallets remained in the tent. Who leaves without shoes, phone, or wallet? At the edge of the clearing, I found the first clue: Jason's sweatshirt lying on the ground, one sleeve stretched as if pulled forcefully. 10 yards further into the forest, I found his t-shirt. Then his watch. Each item formed a perfect breadcrumb trail leading deeper into the woods. I followed, aware that I was making a terrible mistake but unable to abandon my friends. The fog seemed to part just enough to reveal the next item, then close behind me as I passed. A quarter-mile in, the trail split. Jason's jeans lay to the left while Cole's hoodie appeared on a path to the right. I stood paralyzed by indecision until I heard it, a whisper that might have been my name, coming from the left fork. I turned my headlamp in that direction and saw movement, a figure ducking behind a tree. "Jason?" I called, voice cracking. The figure stepped partially into view, the right height and build for Jason, but somehow wrong movements too fluid, posture too straight. Before I could process what I was seeing, my headlamp flickered and died. Total darkness enveloped me. Not the darkness of a night in the woods with ambient starlight, but absolute, impenetrable blackness. I fumbled in my pocket for my phone, finding it dead despite being fully charged when we'd gone to sleep. Something rustled in the underbrush nearby, not one set of footsteps, but many, moving in perfect synchronization. They circled me slowly, maintaining distance but clearly aware of my position. I remained frozen, afraid that movement would trigger whatever was out there. A sound reached my ears, breathing, heavy and wet, like someone with fluid in their lungs. It came from directly behind me. I felt warm air on the back of my neck. I ran, blind, terrified, with no sense of direction. Branches whipped my face and arms. I tripped over roots and stones, falling repeatedly only to scramble back up and continue fleeing. Behind me, something pursued, something heavy that crashed through underbrush without concern for stealth. After what felt like hours but was probably minutes, I burst through the trees and found myself back at the ledge, our entry point to the campsite. Morning light had begun to filter through the canopy. I turned, expecting to see my pursuer, but the forest behind me was still and empty. I waited at the ledge until full daylight, calling for my friends until my voice gave out. Neither appeared. With trembling hands, I climbed down the rock face and hiked back to the parking lot, half expecting to find their vehicles gone. They weren't. Both cars sat exactly where we'd left them, locked and undisturbed. I drove to the nearest ranger station, incoherently reporting my missing friends. The rangers were professional but skeptical, especially when I couldn't precisely mark our campsite on their maps. They noted that no official campground existed in that area of the forest. "We'll send out a search team," the head ranger assured me. "But if your friends separated from you, they might have already hiked out to another exit point." I knew better but couldn't explain why. The search found nothing: no tent, no campsite, No belongings, no sign that 3 people had spent 2 nights in the forest. No bones arranged in spirals, no crude shelter, nothing but endless trees and silence. 2 weeks after returning from Whispering Ridge, I received the first letter. No return address, postmarked from a small town in Pennsylvania I'd never heard of. Inside was a single Polaroid photograph, showing our campsite from an angle that suggested it had been taken from the surrounding trees. Jason, Cole, and I sat around the fire, our faces turned slightly away from the camera as if we'd heard something in the forest. I didn't remember anyone taking pictures during our trip. None of us had brought a Polaroid camera. I studied the image for hours, noticing details that made my skin crawl. In the background, barely visible between 2 distant trees, stood a figure too tall, too thin, its proportions subtly wrong. And our expressions in the photo weren't casual or relaxed. We looked terrified, frozen in the moment before flight. The second letter arrived a month later, this time from Oregon. Another Polaroid, the 3 of us asleep in the tent, photographed through the mesh window. The tent flap was open wider than we'd left it that night. Something had stood over us while we slept. I called the detective assigned to the missing persons case repeatedly, but interest had waned when no evidence surfaced. People go missing in national forests all the time, he explained with rehearsed patience. Usually they've chosen to disappear. I knew Jason wouldn't abandon his elderly mother who depended on his support. Cole wouldn't leave behind the construction job he'd finally secured after months of searching. But without evidence, the case stalled. The final letter arrived exactly 3 months after our trip, postmarked from my own city, which terrified me more than its contents. A third Polaroid showing the crude shelter we'd discovered, but transformed. The plywood walls now displayed hundreds of photographs pinned to the surface. Even in the grainy image, I recognized myself in many of them entering my apartment building, sitting at my desk by the window, sleeping in my bed. I'd been watched for months, maybe longer. That night, I heard it for the first time, the same wet, labored breathing I'd heard in the forest, now outside my bedroom window on the 4th floor of my apartment building. When I gathered the courage to look outside, I saw nothing but empty streets and streetlights casting yellow pools on wet pavement. But something had left muddy footprints on the fire escape, prints too large to be human, with toes too long and articulated, like fingers. I didn't sleep that night, or many nights after. I installed additional locks, security cameras, motion detector lights. None of it helped the growing certainty that whatever had taken my friends had followed me home. 5 months after our camping trip, Cole's sister called me. Her voice trembled with a mixture of hope and dread. "I got a text from Cole's phone," she said. "First one since he disappeared." My grip tightened on my own phone. What did it say? Just coordinates. GPS coordinates in one word: help. I knew before she told me the coordinates would lead back to Whispering Ridge. When she confirmed this, something inside me shattered. The fragile normalcy I'd constructed since returning from the forest collapsed like a house of cards. "I'm going to send them to the police," she continued. "They won't find anything," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "I need those coordinates." "Why? You can't be thinking of going back there." I didn't answer her question directly. "Did you tell anyone else about the text?" "No, just you." A pause. "You know something you're not telling me." "It's better if you don't know," I replied. "Send me the exact coordinates, then delete the message and forget you received it." She argued, of course, threatened to call the police herself if I didn't explain. Eventually, I told her a sanitized version of what had happened, that we'd become lost, separated in the forest, that I believed Jason and Cole might have found shelter somewhere remote with limited phone service. I promised to take experienced guides, emergency supplies, proper communication equipment. All lies. The coordinates arrived in my email an hour later, along with a message: "Find my brother." I spent the next week preparing not with camping gear and hiking supplies, but with different tools altogether. A handheld GPS unit, a night vision monocular I purchased from a hunting supply store, a digital recorder, and my father's revolver, taken from the safe where it had remained since his death 3 years earlier. I had never fired it, but I watched enough YouTube videos to understand the basics. I told no one where I was going. I called in sick to work, citing a family emergency. I left no note, made no arrangements for my absence. Part of me already knew I might not return. The forest looked different in winter: skeletal trees, patches of snow in shaded areas, the undergrowth withered and brown. I reached the trailhead at noon, parked in the now empty lot, and began the hike with single-minded determination. The GPS unit led me unerringly toward the coordinates from Cole's text, which aligned almost perfectly with my memory of our campsite. The forest was silent except for the crunch of dead leaves and occasional twigs beneath my boots. No birds called, no squirrels darted through branches. The absence of wildlife registered as wrong on a primal level, a warning sign my body recognized before my conscious mind. I reached the ledge by mid-afternoon. The climb was more difficult than I remembered, the hand and footholds slick with ice in places. At the top, I stood staring down at the clearing where we had camped. It remained recognizable but transformed. The fire ring was gone, replaced by a perfect circle of bare earth surrounded by evenly spaced stones. Our tent was still there, collapsed and partially rotted, its once bright fabric faded to a sickly gray. Most disturbing were the markings carved into surrounding trees, not random vandalism, but precise geometric patterns, circles containing smaller circles, triangles with extra angles, eyes that weren't quite eyes. I checked the GPS coordinates again. This was exactly where Cole's text had originated. "Cole?" I called, my voice sounding thin and frail in the winter air. "Jason?" Something moved at the edge of my vision, just a shadow slipping between distant trees. I turned toward it, hand moving instinctively to the revolver in my coat pocket. "Who's there?" I demanded. A figure stepped partially into view, remaining half hidden behind a massive pine. The right height and build to be Cole, but something in my gut screamed that it wasn't him, not entirely, not anymore. "You came back," said a voice that approximated Cole's but lacked its warmth and rhythm. It sounded hollow, like someone speaking through a long tube. "Where's Jason?" I asked, drawing the revolver but keeping it pointed at the ground. The figure tilted its head at an uncomfortable angle. "With us, where he belongs, where you belong. Show yourself properly," I demanded. "Step out where I can see you." "You don't want that," Not Cole replied. "You think you do, but you don't. Some things can't be unseen." I raised the gun, aiming at the portion of the figure visible beyond the tree. "I'm not playing games. Where are my friends?" The figure sighed, a sound like wind through dead leaves. "They're here. They're everywhere here. Parts of them, anyway. We needed parts." A wave of nausea hit me. "What does that mean? What did you do to them?" "Not me. Us. We've been here long before your kind named these woods. We sleep, we wake, we hunger." The figure shifted slightly. "But you know that already. You felt us watching. You heard us breathing. You sensed us even before you came here the first time. It was right. Even during our first college trip years ago, I'd felt something wrong about this place, a presence that pressed against my consciousness like hands on a window pane, trying to find a way in." "What are you?" I whispered. "Hungry," it replied simply. "And you brought something we need." I tightened my grip on the revolver. "I didn't bring anything. Not in your pockets. Not in your pack. In your head. Memories. Connections. The map of everyone you've ever known or loved. The location of every soul that would come looking if you vanished." Not Cole stepped fully into view, and I felt my sanity slip a notch. It wore Cole's face like an ill-fitting mask. The proportions were wrong, eyes too wide and flat, mouth stretched too broadly across features that seemed to shift subtly even as I watched. The body beneath his familiar flannel shirt was wrong too angular, joints bending in directions human anatomy wouldn't allow. "You're not Cole," I stated the obvious, trying to ground myself. "Parts of me are," it replied. "The parts we needed, the rest is something older." I raised the gun higher. "Stay back." It smiled, revealing teeth that hadn't been visible before too many, too sharp. "We've been patient. We let you leave last time because we weren't finished with the others. But now we are. Now it's your turn." I fired the revolver. The sound was deafening in the winter stillness. The thing wearing Cole's face jerked backward but didn't fall. Where the bullet struck its shoulder, the flannel shirt tore open to reveal not blood and tissue, but something dark and fibrous, like wet wood. It looked down at the wound with mild curiosity. "That won't work here. Nothing from your world works here the way you think it should." From the surrounding forest came sounds of movement, branches snapping, undergrowth rustling, not from one direction, but from all around. Closing in, I fired again, this time aiming for what passed as its head. The bullet struck true, and for a moment, the thing's form destabilized, flickering like a bad television signal. Cole's features dissolving into something I couldn't comprehend. Then it reformed, the wound already sealing itself. "You should run now," it suggested, almost kindly. "We enjoy the chase. Your friends did too, for a while." I ran. I fled not toward the ledge and escape, but deeper into the forest, toward the coordinates from Cole's text. Something in me knew that running toward safety was exactly what they expected, what they wanted. The chase was part of their ritual, their feeding pattern. So I ran toward danger instead, hoping to disrupt whatever plan they had in motion. The forest changed as I moved deeper, trees growing closer together, their bark blackened as if by fire, though no fire had been reported in this region for decades. The ground beneath my feet transitioned from frozen soil to something spongier, almost membranous. I tried not to think about what I might be running across. Behind me, the pursuit continued, multiple entities moving through the forest with unnatural speed and coordination. They made no attempt at stealth now, crashing through undergrowth and calling to each other with sounds no human throat could produce. My lungs burned. My legs threatened to buckle. But terror drove me forward, deeper into the heart of whatever aberration had claimed this section of forest. I reached the exact coordinates from Cole's message as the last daylight faded. What I found there defied explanation, a perfect clearing that couldn't have formed naturally. Trees surrounded it in a geometrically precise circle. At the center stood the crude shelter we'd discovered months ago, but transformed. It had grown. The original plywood structure now formed just one wall of a larger construction that incorporated living trees, their trunks bent and fused into impossible shapes to create a cathedral-like space beneath. The tarp roof had been replaced with a canopy of interwoven branches that pulsed slightly, as if respiring. Most disturbing were the photographs, hundreds, perhaps thousands of them, covering every surface. Polaroids, digital prints, ancient sepia-toned images, all showing people in this forest. Some dated back decades based on the clothing styles. Some were recent enough to show modern hiking gear. In many, the subjects looked directly at the camera, expressions ranging from confusion to terror. And moving among these images were shapes not quite human, not quite animal, that seemed to shift and blur when viewed directly. They tended the photographs like gardeners caring for plants, occasionally removing one from the wall and carrying it deeper into the structure. I crouched behind a fallen log, watching this incomprehensible scene unfold. My pursuers had fallen silent, but I knew they were still coming. This place, this structure, was clearly their destination, their home. As my eyes adjusted to the growing darkness, I noticed something at the center of the shelter, a device that seemed jarringly out of place in this organic nightmare. A camera, not digital, but an old Polaroid, mounted on what might have been a tripod fashioned from bone and sinew. Beside it lay a pile of objects I recognized with growing horror: Jason's watch, Cole's pocket knife, my own lost hat that had disappeared during our trip. Personal items taken from dozens, perhaps hundreds of victims over who knows how many years. I understood then, in a moment of clarity that felt like breaking through ice into freezing water. They didn't just take people, they collected them, preserved them somehow in these endless photographs. The camera wasn't just a tool, it was the center of whatever ritual they performed. My revolver had 3 bullets remaining, not enough to fight whatever these entities were, but perhaps enough for what I needed to do. I waited until the shambling figures moved to the far side of the clearing, then sprinted toward the center of the shelter. The ground beneath my feet felt warm and yielding, like flesh rather than soil. I reached the camera, aimed my revolver at it point blank, and fired twice. The Polaroid exploded in a spray of plastic, metal, and something dark that might have been blood. A scream tore through the forest, not from any single entity, but from the forest itself. The trees shuddered. The ground convulsed. Photographs began falling from the walls, their images melting and running like wax. The figures turned toward me, their forms fluctuating wildly between human appearance and something else, something with too many limbs, too many eyes, proportions that violated the laws of geometry. I fired my final bullet into the pile of personal effects, hitting something that sparked and caught fire. The flames spread unnaturally fast, engulfing the center of the shelter in seconds. As the fire grew, the entities became more substantial, more visible, as if the flames revealed their true nature. What I saw in that firelight broke something in my mind. They had never been human, never been animals. They were something else entirely, ancient, intelligences that had learned to mimic life forms but never quite mastered the subtleties. The largest of them lurched toward me, its form settling briefly into a grotesque approximation of Cole. Beneath the familiar features, I glimpsed something vast and incomprehensible, a consciousness that had existed in these woods long before humans arrived, feeding on fear and memory and identity. "You cannot unmake us," it said in Cole's voice. "We are bound to this place." "I don't need to unmake you," I replied, backing toward the edge of the clearing. "I just need people to know you exist." From my pocket, I pulled my phone, not dead as I'd led them to believe, but recording everything since I'd entered the clearing. I'd live-streamed the entire encounter to a private server, insurance in case I didn't make it out. The creature wearing Cole's face recoiled as if physically struck. Others have tried to expose us. Their evidence never survives. Technology changes, I said. You don't. With that, I turned and ran for the ledge, for escape, for whatever normal life might remain possible after what I'd witnessed. Behind me, the fire continued spreading, consuming the unnatural structure and the thousands of photographs it contained. I never looked back. I didn't need to. I could feel them pursuing their rage, their hunger, their ancient confusion at being exposed to the modern world. But they didn't catch me. Perhaps they couldn't leave their territory. Perhaps the fire weakened them. Perhaps my knowledge of their existence gave me some power they couldn't overcome. I reached my car just as full darkness descended, drove straight to the nearest town, and collapsed in a motel room. The live stream had worked grainy, dark, but clear enough to show the structure, the photographs, the fire. Not clear enough to show the creatures in detail, which was perhaps a mercy. That was 2 years ago. I've moved 4 times since then, changing my name, my appearance, my entire life. The footage I captured went viral briefly before being dismissed as an elaborate hoax. Experts pointed out the impossibilities in the structure I'd filmed, the way physics seemed to work differently in that clearing. Some suggested advanced CGI. Others claimed I'd used actors and practical effects. Only a few believed, mostly families of those who had disappeared in those woods over the decades. They recognized items belonging to their loved ones in my footage. They contacted me, shared stories of similar experiences, of photographs arriving from impossible locations, of being watched by something that moved just at the edge of vision. The official investigation found nothing. Rangers and police searched the area I identified but discovered no shelter, no scorched clearing, no evidence of the massive fire I'd described. The forest appeared untouched, primeval. They labeled my story a hoax, possibly motivated by guilt over abandoning my friends during a camping trip gone wrong. Jason and Cole remain officially missing. Their families have given up hope for their return. Sometimes I dream of them not as they were, but as they became, parts of them incorporated into something older and hungrier than humanity was ever meant to encounter. I keep moving because sometimes I still hear that wet, labored breathing outside my window at night. Sometimes I find photographs in my mailbox, images of me sleeping, eating, working with no postmark or return address. Sometimes my phone captures strange distortions in the background of selfies, tall, thin figures with proportions that shouldn't exist. I've stopped deleting these images. Instead, I collect them, studying them for patterns or meanings I might have missed. The entities in the forest collected photographs as a way of collecting people, their memories, their connections, perhaps even their souls. I don't know if my live stream weakened them or merely angered them. I don't know if burning their collection released their victims or simply destroyed evidence of their existence. What I do know is this: the forest is still there. Whispering Ridge still waits for hikers to stumble across its unnatural clearing, and whatever hungers there is, patient, ancient enough to wait decades for revenge, intelligent enough to adapt its methods to a changing world. So I keep moving, keep watching. I've installed cameras in every corner of my current apartment. I sleep with a weapon within reach. I avoid forests entirely. And if you're reading this, consider it a warning. If you're ever hiking and find a clearing that seems too perfect, a campsite with a fire ring already prepared, or a ledge that must be climbed to reach an isolated spot, turn back. Some parts of our world were never meant for human habitation. Some entities we were never meant to encounter. They're still hungry. They're still collecting. And sometimes, on nights when the wind blows just right, I swear I can hear them breathing just outside my door, waiting for me to let down my guard. God help me. Sometimes I almost want to.